All right, we're back. We took 2 weeks off instead of 1 week, but we're back now. And how was your 2 weeks?
Not too bad. Fairly uneventful. Didn't really. Yeah, I mostly worked. Been pretty busy lately with work and stuff, just because we have a stupid turnover right now. So
That always sucks. I hate when I mean, luckily lately in the restaurant it's been kind of steady. We've kind of been able to keep most of the people that we hire, at least the decent people. But there was a time, especially like right at the beginning of when we were reopening stuff and we were trying to restaff, where we'd get people just staying for a couple weeks and then going, and it was just like we thought we had a dishwasher, then they would go, or we thought we'd have a host or a server or some shit, and then they would go, and it was a huge pain in the ass to deal with the time.
yeah, I can imagine we're having the exact same problem. Oh, so that's fun.
Yeah, and all last week I was dealing with, I talked about how before I take my bike to work, and I got a flat tire in the back, and then I patched it, and then a couple days later I ran over a fucking screw and fucking got it flat again. The same tire went flat.
You'll love it.
Just like, yo, this. At that point, I put a couple patches in it, and like I tested it out, and it just didn't stay inflated. So I was like, oh fuck it, I'm just gonna get a new tube.
Yeah, it's weird. I'll have like a streak. I'll go like 8 months without hitting absolutely anything, and then I feel like I have like a 3-month period where I get like 6 fucking nails in my tires. It's ridiculous.
Yeah. Matt said to boost your mic. I think yeah, because I had him hooked up on a different volume, so I can change it independently. So he should be louder now. It's not that he's poor and needs a better mic. He's using his phone anyway, so yeah, no, my 2 weeks was pretty uneventful, mostly work and climbing like I do most Mondays now. I took a whole week off, which I usually don't do. I usually at least go twice a week. And but yeah, last week I didn't get a chance to go except for last Monday. So I felt super rusty when I went back to the gym today. And I still did some problems that like were like at the kind of upper end of my skill level and shit, so it felt good to be able to complete them. But I really should have gone more last week. But now I've got the bike back in action. That was what fucked me up, is that like one of the times that I ran over the screw was when I was biking to the gym, to go climbing, and then so I didn't get to go that day because I was just like, fuck. And I had to go to work like later that day, so I went back home, and I went back home and then just had to get ready for work, and so I went to work after that. Yeah, now I got that. I got a lock for the bike, which I didn't have before, so I didn't really feel like taking it out and like leaving it out and shit, because motherfucking can get stolen.
Oh yeah, somebody would absolutely snatch that up.
Okay, Matt says to tell you to stop being poor and get a computer with a 3080 to play Minecraft RTX on.
Nice. Oh shit. Sorry, I I was pulling some brushes out, and I found an X-Acto knife. I forgot to put a top on.
Oh shit. Yeah. Slice yourself.
No, I should be all right. Didn't catch anything. I felt it hit my thumbnail and was like, "Oh, that's probably not good."
No. Yeah, so right now like my forearms are all sore, which hurts to use a computer. It's the worst. But yeah, let's get on to the news. Let's find out what went on in the world today. Throw on my screen for the audience, and the first thing I want to talk about is actually getting troops in Ukraine, because who could have predicted not us. We never warned about this, and the warmongering and the hockey propaganda that was happening. Who could have predicted that it would lead to troops?
Yeah, definitely not us. I mean, we didn't say that. They'd sort of slowly sneak that in somehow, or eventually that there'd be actual soldiers on the ground. No. It's all we're just giving them money and stuff. It's not that big of a deal. Now we're gonna put actual soldiers in Ukraine, and that was after the no-fly zones, which
It's already an act of war,
it's like we're gonna shoot down Russian planes, but we're still not involved.
And the thing is, of course, they're giving this a pretense of being a like a measured response, right? Like a just not open-ended like some of our other wars. They're saying, okay, we're just sending U.S. special operations forces to protect the U.S. embassy in Kiev, but the translation is U.S. boots on the ground in Ukraine, fighting Russian forces if they should need to, and that kind of stuff. It's like that sort of stuff, when that's on the table, it's going to lead to some fucked up shit down the line, because Russia is going to respond in kind when it's the United States forces themselves. Like, it was already an issue when it was just U.S. fucking bombs or money that the U.S. sent over to pay for arms and shit. That was already like enough of like a diplomatic issue with Russia. Now we're just going to straight up have our guys with our guns in their territory, or not in their territory, but in the territory that's going to be in conflict with them.
Big deal,
Yeah. But yeah, of course, CNN just kind of gives the whole best framing possible with it. U.S. doesn't believe Russia would overtly attack the embassy, but the concern is that Russia air defenses or missiles could inadvertently target the compound, and the situation could dramatically escalate the situation. You see all the weasel words and inadvertently the situation could dramatically escalate to the point where we're fucking at full-scale war. Who knows what could happen? It could just be some random ass fucking thing. It could be, we could just randomly have an accidental war, maybe. And those things just happen sometimes. It tripped. It's like this fucking. It's like the U.S. War Department is one of those really shitty cheating spouses that gets caught in bed with another lady and then tries to play it off like it fucking. I don't know, man. We were just talking and then we was naked and I accidentally fell and we was fucking all of a sudden for some reason.
We were moving a statue. And we fell, and somehow our clothes came off, and then I ended up inside of this lady.
Yeah. So yeah, that's what the CNNs are here to do. There's no appetite at the Pentagon to provide air support such as helicopters or fixed-wing transportation. If that's done, it could rapidly escalate the U.S. military footprint because of the need to provide potential rescue and reconnaissance forces if U.S. plane was shot down. This is not what we're going to do. We're just going to do the sort of, the small war. Okay, just the itty bitty war. We're not gonna be extreme. We're gonna, no crazy Somalia shit. Also, we're going back to Somalia. I should have put that up somewhere else here, but yeah, we're also going back to Somalia. That was another thing that we could have done without, because I think, was it 2 weeks ago that we had actually seen the Scott Horton episode or the video on Somalia? I think it might have been either 2 or 3 weeks ago.
Yeah, we watched it. I remember.
Yeah. And yeah, so of course the way the New York Times as a publication reports on this makes sure to kind of leave out the whole history and context. It just was listen, one thing I love, where was it, is the title.
Hang on, Your audio's cutting out like crazy.
Hello. Testing. 1, 2. Am I here?
No, it's still cutting out. It's weird. It's I'm not sure what's going on. Is anybody else getting that?
Wait, hold on. How is it now? Testing 1, 2, 3.
No, it's still weird.
Oh. Hold on, I'm gonna try to replug my mic in, or like unplug and replug.
Okay.
Testing. Hello. Hello, hello.
Coming through. I can hear you, but it's real garbled. That's weird.
Hold on. Testing 1, 2, 3. Still garbled?
Light technical difficulties.
Hello, hello. Testing. Testing. Can you hear me now?
Might be my connection, bud. I don't know.
Yeah,
I don't know if it's coming through. I
Yeah.
don't know if it's coming through clear for everybody else. It might be mine. What the hell's going on?
Jenny, can you tell me how my audio is doing? Oh, hey. Paul and Jenny and Matt are all here. Supposedly, my microphone is cutting in and out. That's what Hominis is telling me. You can hear me? You can hear us? Okay, yeah, it might be on your end, man. Kind of think my mic is kind of being sensitive right now. So I can see it. Volume, it's not when I'm not talking. Alright, so he's checking his connection on his end. Oh man, I need to stretch.
Yeah. Let's see. No, I'm still good here. Not sure what the hell's going on. I'm coming through okay, right? You can hear me?
Yeah, you seem to be pretty good now.
That is so weird. It's coming through like super blown out. Fuck.
Do you want to pop out of the call and then pop back in?
Yeah, I'll pop out and then I'll pop back in, see if that helps.
Mhm.
All right.
Alright, how's it now? Still the same?
Oh, that is weird. I don't know what's going on. Like I can understand what you're saying most of the time, but it's like sometimes it just completely blows out.
I'll end the call on my end and see if recreating it helps. Audio any different or no?
Nuh-uh. I'm not crazy, I swear. I can't
That's
tell
so
if
weird.
anybody else hearing it this way though. If it's just on my end, that's one thing, but I don't know if it's coming out.
Yeah, at least Jenny says that she can hear it just fine. Stream settings.
Yeah,
Stream
it's gotta be
quality.
coming through weird on mine then. Hang on one sec. Let's see.
A little brushing up against its static, but it's not cutting out. Okay. At least it sounds good for the stream.
That's something on my end.
Your phone's connected to your Wi-Fi?
Yeah, it's connected straight to my Wi-Fi. I'm not sure what's going on.
Okay.
See, now I know it's not my headphones because it's coming out of my phone.
And it sounds the same, yeah.
Oh boy.
It's so weird that it would just like pop up out of nowhere.
Yeah, that is weird. I had static and then it was weird. It was like your voice sounded pretty normal, but like the louder it got, it would just completely blow out all the sound.
Huh.
Now I've got static. Like I don't know what the fuck's going on.
So now it just sounds staticky and kind of garbled, or what?
Yeah, still. Fuck. I don't know what the hell's going on. It's never done this before. And like I don't have anything connected right now. I'm just talking to my phone. So I shouldn't be picking up any kind of interference or anything. I don't know what's on.
If I turn off my own stream like on Discord to you, does it change at all or no? Same.
No, it's the same.
Hmm.
Let's see.
Wait, no, that's not what I wanted to stream to you.
No. It's not doing that. It's something with the Discord connection, I think.
Yeah.
It's gotta be like something's completely fucked.
Yeah, I was taking a look at like my audio settings on there, but it seems to be okay.
It's gotta be my connection, but I've swapped it between the Wi-Fi and then just being hooked to like cellular, and it hasn't made a difference, so I'm not sure what's going on here. Like our Wi-Fi is pretty decent, so it shouldn't have an issue. It never has before.
Yeah, no, it should be coming through on Wi-Fi just fine. At least it's better than if it was just on your cell connection anyway. I tried turning my mic down a little bit on, or I usually don't use auto-determined input sensitivity, but maybe that helps. I don't know. Testing, yeah.
Let's see.
Yeah, the settings are, just changed it to input sensitivity, so maybe it's more sensitive to when I pick it up, or when I speak.
It might be. We'll see if it'll keep picking. If it keeps blowing out, I'm not sure what I'm gonna. See, I got static again. That's so weird.
Well, it doesn't seem like it would be from my mic specifically, because it, like, when you're saying you have static, it's also when I'm not talking at all, and like when the
it's when you're talking, I'm not getting much of it, but when there's just like dead air, it's popping up every once in a while. Like I wonder if I'm catching interference or something, but I don't know what the hell I would catch interference from.
trying second. No, the live didn't have any audio, I don't think.
It's loud.
Weird. All right, so let me, yeah, I guess let me know if it blows out or anything, but keep going, I guess, for now. Major moment here. Yeah. Yeah, his Wi-Fi is racist. It just doesn't like brown people.
That's what it is. My Wi-Fi is racist.
And yeah, so are the true.
Racist.
And so are the Warhawks who want to get to war in Afghanistan. That's or in Somalia. That's my segue back to Somalia.
Oh man! Speaking of Afghanistan, have we hit the amazing George Bush gaffe?
Yeah, oh yeah, I should pull that up for sure. That was so fun. I cracked up so much when you sent it to me. Yeah, we can.
That was incredible. I think honestly the response more than the act. I mean, yeah, him fucking up and saying that was pretty funny, but like just the general response to it was.
Yeah, I love this. It was so good.
In contrast, Russian elections are rigged. Political opponents are imprisoned or otherwise eliminated from participating in the electoral process. The result is an absence of checks and balances in Russia and the decision of one man to launch a wholly unjustified and brutal invasion of Iraq. I mean, of Ukraine. Iraq. Anyway,
Good God.
75.
I love his little fucking George Bush right afterwards when he knew he fucked up. It's just,
Good God.
Yeah, because he did invade Iraq unjustifiably. It's funny when they say the true thing out loud.
Well, yeah, and everybody just kind of laughed about it, like, "Oh yeah, he's just, he's 75, he's old," and I'm like.
Yeah,
well,
remember,
but like,
remember when he lied us into that war? Man, what a fucking boomer. You know, just boomer things lying to get us into war. Well, I mean, it is. It's not.
What a goof, It's like, oh, no big deal.
Yeah, and so you compare the Somalia article that the New York Times put out. It was super soft and just sort of reporting it in the best kind of light possible. Even tried to like make Donald Trump look bad. It's in terms of like, it's like, well, from which Donald J. Trump largely withdrew in his final weeks of office, and because that was a bad thing and stuff. And don't get me wrong, Donald Trump did some awful shit in Somalia specifically. It's not like he wound down the drone strikes and the bombings and stuff, which was still going on even after he withdrew ground troops. But yeah, so you look at a story like from the Gray Zone that is, openly anti-war, openly critical of the U.S. war state. And yeah, we're gonna need a bigger shoe. Yeah, he definitely needs another shoe thrown at him. I remember there was that guy who threw the shoe. His birthday was like a while ago, and there's like an article on him. He seems like a great guy. But anyways, so you look at Gray Zone's article on it, and it's way more informative in terms of like it gives you actually like the history of like why Al-Shabaab formed, because there was a whole US backed Ethiopian army that had invaded, and then the people there because the Ethiopian army and the Ethiopian people were largely Christian, and so they persecuted the Islamic people that were over there, and so the Islamic people banded together, and the faction that rose to defend them was the youth or Al-Shabaab. And then so Al-Shabaab then became powerful because they were fighting to defend the entire country, and so people trusted them and backed them, and then we've been using them as a scapegoat in the region ever since. They're like, well, look at those crazy Al-Shabaab guys, like where did they come from? It's not like there was Ethiopian armies killing and raping people left and right with US guns and shit or anything, but yeah, that's, so they compare, the New York Times reported that Biden has approved a Pentagon request for standing authority to target about a dozen suspected leaders of Al-Shabaab, the Somali terrorist group that is affiliated with Al-Qaeda. Are these motivations true? Does Washington really want to merely to defeat Al-Shabaab? Is Al-Shabaab actually linked to Al-Qaeda? And if so, to what degree? As usual, the mainstream state corporate media reportage is missing context and reference to international law. As we shall see, the context behind the U.S. redeployment is naked imperialism, using counterterrorism as the latest in a long line of excuses to interfere in the politics of the strategically significant country on the Horn of Africa. In terms of international law, signatories of the UN Charter have legal responsibilities to gain authorization from the Security Council before launching military operations, something the Biden administration and its predecessors have never done in Somalia or anywhere else for that matter. It goes on to talk about Trump's role in there, which he was, blowing Somalis to pieces, even in greater numbers than Obama did. He did withdraw ground troops, but it's mostly kind of as a PR stunt and to make things kind of hard for the Biden administration. And in response, the neoliberal anti-Trump establishment made Trump's decision seem, or portrayed it as a sign of weakness against Islamic terrorism, and basically questioning his motives. And if basically if Trump did the one thing, then the opposite thing is actually the good thing, because anything that Trump does is bad automatically by virtue of the fact that Trump did it, even if it means less people fighting wars, which usually is a good thing. So yeah, you can. I would recommend reading the rest of the Gray Zone article. You don't have to read it line by line, but it does even talk about the origins of Al-Shabaab in 2007 when Ethiopia aggressed against them. Even obviously gives context for the fact that Al-Qaeda didn't just drop from the sky either. They were, of course, well funded by the U.S. state in order to fight the Soviets, or the proxy armies that the Soviets used in the region at the time. U.S. puppet state takes control in 2010. Tons of stuff, good stuff in the article. Way more context and way more information than you would have gotten from the New York Times article, obviously. And again, the Gray Zone's a lefty anti-war rag publication. So outside of just their anti-war stance, we really don't have a lot to agree with the people, the authors, that much ideologically. But at the very least, they're honest, which is it seems like it's asking a lot for reporters nowadays.
Yeah, it is.
One in good news though, we have the what is it? The DHS disinformation board gets put on pause. That's they're pausing it, and they don't seem to be going forward with it anymore.
Yeah, they didn't get rid of it completely. They just paused it.
Which,
although I'm not sure what they're gonna who they're gonna who they're gonna get to be the new head now that their head is resigned.
Yeah, I saw a lot of interesting information on her and her links with intelligence here in the U.S. and in the UK, apparently. One of those young fucking World Economic Forum type organizations that inserts people into various places. Lots of insertion going on, and yeah, she seems like just a glowing resume in her background.
Yeah, didn't she? I mean, besides the singing and everything, didn't she? What was the official reason she gave? Didn't she say something about death threats that she was getting?
Yeah, I'm sure she cited backlash when she talked about like why she's like, maybe this is a bad idea. Well, as if any public figure on the right is just immune to backlash. It's not like, oh, you know what story I should have brought up now was that one reporter that went undercover in the extreme right wing to see how like violent and extremist they were, and then they get like attacked by left-wing protesters and shit like almost immediately.
Yeah, almost immediately, and then they were having to like identify themselves.
Yeah, I was saying Jenny, lots of, I think, what was it, like harassment and derision online, that kind of stuff. Which, again, they're like shocked when they make super condescending and mocking musical videos talking about people spreading lies, and are amazed to find out that it's not looked at kindly when you do that. And another thing that was super interesting that actually came up was Hunter Biden's laptop. And now it turns out that he received $11 million from overseas business deals between like 2013 and 2018, I want to say. And oh yeah, insertion. Yeah, that's right. Lots of insertion. That's right. Tons of insertion going on in terms of ideas inserted into people's brains. Jenny, I don't know what you're talking about or what you're thinking. It's called manufacturing consent. That's what the phrase is. It's actually a super interesting book by Noam Chomsky, which I don't often recommend his books, but that was a decent book of his a while back. I think it's like the 90s or something that he wrote it. But manufacturing consent was about the media and how it, selectively and biasedly, with bias, it reports about war in a way to, make people war hungry, right? And to make it look like there's a bad guy that America needs to intervene in, and America's the good guy. And so he called the book Manufacturing Consent because, it was basically about how the media goes about, manufacturing a narrative in which people think that going to war is a good idea. And so they give their consent to go to war. But it's really just the result of theater that's, put on by the war media, the state media. So yeah, it's an interesting idea. I think he has also a documentary that goes into those ideas, and also just talks about Noam Chomsky as a guy and his ridiculous anarcho syndicalism. Because what goes great with anarchy is workers unions, because they never have nefarious motives there. But besides his kind of silly political ideas, the whole criticism of the media war state kind of conglomerate is a pretty accurate one, a pretty well detailed one in that book. It's one I
stop clock is right twice a day.
Yeah, well, I mean, this is one area that the left, and especially like the more anarchist and anti-war left gets generally correct. Is like they tend to be generally correct on like the state corporate kind of marriage and the exploitation that can come from that marriage, but then they falsely call it like state capitalism or some shit like that.
Of course, yes.
They think
capitalism.
they think it's like tied to the way that markets function in general, and then they tie it into the right wing, and there's this whole like misattribution of causes and stuff that goes on there. But in terms of their motives with like defending like exploitation of like people in foreign countries and all that shit, like they definitely have like good motives in those areas. And like I said, like a lot of my anti-war information comes from either neutral or like anti-authoritarian left-wing sources, like the Gray Zone. So there's some common ground there in terms of opposing authoritarianism, but like understanding of economics or understanding of markets and property rights and those sorts of ideas, that's where there's more divergence and more separation between the camps. But yeah, so Noam Chomsky, was that's an area that I would expect him to be more right on and more knowledgeable about, because he's coming it from standpoint of criticizing the corporate war state and the media that backs them. And so if you're coming at it from that angle, then you're gonna hit some bullseyes, because it's pretty easy. It's a pretty easy target. There.
Yeah, it's pretty easy to hit.
But I mean, he's a freaking like PhD in linguistics, so he like explains it super fucking well. Like he and actually, speaking of just in general, he's actually way more qualified to speak on linguistics. Like he has a whole like theory of how language developed that is actually well respected in the area of like the professional like linguistics studies and shit like that. And so that's the hilarious thing to me, is that like his education isn't in political science, isn't in economics, isn't in philosophy, like in general. It's in linguistics and the history of the development of language. And he's actually most of his like important like academic work has been in the development of like the history of the development of language, which is sort of just kind of ironic, because there's another guy, John McWhorter. He does like he's done a couple of books on like the woke left and like how they're shitty. He's a black guy, but he is also a professional linguist, and I've seen or listened to like a lecture series on his about linguistics, and it's funny to hear him mention like Noam Chomsky and his influence in the field, like completely separate from his political work, which is where I mainly knew about him and where I learned about him when I was like a lefty in high school and shit like that. But that's a huge ass tangent that really didn't. Hunter Biden, right? Hunter Biden. Let me go to the actual good stuff. Where is it? His rear income flowed from 2013 through 2018 as a result of ties to Ukrainian national gas company suspected of bribery and a since vanished Chinese tycoon accused of bribery and fraud, NBC said. So this is being reported in NBC too. By the way, I just chose the New York Post to cover it. But okay, so this is an enormous amount of money for Hunter Biden, whom I don't believe is an experienced corporate transactional attorney. Former White House chief ethics lawyer Richard Painter told the Post, "All I know is I wouldn't be pulling that kind of money, and I've been a securities law expert for almost 30 years. There's no way I'd be pulling down that kind of money." Painter, now a University of Minnesota law professor and Democratic candidate for Congress, also said if Hunter Biden cared about the protection of the family's reputation, he would disclose everything. The whole thing doesn't look good, he added. Which again, this coming from information from a laptop that we were told was complete Russian lies like a fucking year ago. And now it's being reported about, like in NBC News, about his like $11 million fucking benefit that resulted from his business dealings in Ukraine. Which is another conspiracy theory.
The 8th time this has happened, something that either didn't exist at all or was just Russian disinformation. A year goes by and suddenly it's common knowledge, it's mainstream news, and we just kind of act like that everybody was on board with this the whole time.
I mean, this is why a lot of us have just stopped resisting the whole conspiracy theorist label and the we're just meeting it head on at this point. It's like, yeah, you know what? Fuck it. We just believe all conspiracies because that is way more accurate and way more prone to being confirmed right in the next year, apparently, than these debunkers who think that they have all the facts ahead of time and shit.
Oh yeah, I mean the hit miss ratio, especially lately, has been like fucking astounding. Like people that are considered insane or extremist or whatever you want to fucking call them have been absolutely right, and I'm not just a little right, like absolutely dead to the letter fucking right about stuff far more times than they've been wrong.
No, exactly. And so yeah, so now we're just, you know what, fine, we're conspiracy theorists, we love us some good conspiracies, and just so happens that we're also extremely correct about all of them as well.
I mean, honestly, that's another what do you call it, canary in the mine tunnel, when the fucking conspiracy theorists who think that everyone's evil and everything is bad start being wrong or right all the time. Maybe there's a fucking problem. Like, I don't consider myself a pessimist, but generally speaking, like, if you're constantly saying these people are evil and they're doing evil things and it's going to cause a lot of problems and it just keeps coming true, like, it's kind of hard not to get depressed about it.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely is disconcerting, to say the least, but yeah, I've just kind of gotten into that sweet spot where now, like, all the constant lying and straight up even gaslighting, though I think gaslighting is an overused term at this point, but all that shit, just the constant barrage of negativity for just being questioning and just not immediately fucking diving headfirst into all these ridiculous fucking new enemies that we're supposed to be angry at, right? I've often compared it to the 2-minute hate from 1984. I've probably even brought it up here on the podcast, but honestly, that's what it always reminds me of, is where they sat them down in front of the telescreen and put the national fucking enemy on the screen, and everybody booed and hissed and threw shit and got angry, and then they put the picture of Big Brother on the screen, and everybody felt placated and happy and fucking reassured that Big Brother was watching out for them. This is what I've seen constantly from time to time. We got a new enemy to deal with, and we got fucking Martin Shkreli is a crazy fucking evil guy. We got to make sure that we hate Martin Shkreli. And then Donald Trump comes out. We got to make sure we hate Donald Trump. And then fucking Putin. We got to make sure we hate Putin and everything that he's doing. Also, it's just like every fucking 6 months to a year. COVID. Anybody who doesn't go lockstep with us and make sure that we're safe from COVID, well, they're want to kill your grandma, and we need to put police people on the beaches to fucking make sure that people don't just sit on a beach by themselves, because if you think that you should be able to sit on a beach by yourself, you evil motherfucker. Like, this is where we're going.
Society. Yeah, the spin, especially of this sort of reversal of, like, you're selfish for not doing all of this stuff that they're demanding that you do. Like, you have to radically alter your life for the good of society, and if you don't do that, you are selfish.
And to which I respond, yeah, motherfucker, I'm selfish because I'm me, and you're not me. So who the fuck else is gonna look out for my interests? Not you.
Yeah, what was the meme? It just came around this week. I saw it. Somebody was saying something like, well, your freedom is more important than my safety, and the response was, you're a fucking stranger. My lunch is more important than your safety to me.
Yeah, no, exactly. Like, you're not worried about how I'm gonna pay my bills and how I'm gonna get food on my table, how I'm gonna get to work. Like, you don't give a shit about any of that. So I gotta worry about it. Like, I need to be selfish because I'm the only me. And nobody, I'm the person most, inclined to give a shit about what happens to me. So it kind of behooves me to care about that. And yeah, wage on volunteerism saying, who's the government official? So whatever the government is doing, it's worse. And yeah, no, it's so much fucking worse. Actually, so a lot of the books that I like, when people ask me like, oh, what books do you recommend, on anarchism, economics, and things like that. And while I do have like plenty of stuff on like Austrian economics and things that I can recommend to people, I'd really recommend people books like The Creature from Jekyll Island, which is about the Federal Reserve, talks about how the banking system was built on lies, and people in government and people in banking, like fucking both. Yeah, the Dwayne Johnson Witch Mountain driving meme. That's right, exactly. That's the one that Hominis was just talking about. Yeah. It's like your what was it? Your rights are more important than my safety one. Yeah, that's the Dwayne, that's the Rock Witch Mountain.
Yeah, it's the Rock.
Fucking shit. But yeah, it's my point. Yeah, so I when I recommend them things like that, things like Blacklisted by History, the story of fucking Joe McCarthy, and how he was right the whole goddamn time. That's a really interesting one because people think, oh, Joe McCarthy, this evil guy who like accused people of being communists randomly out of nowhere, and it turns out there was a bunch of fucked up shit going on in the State Department at that time, and he had a ton of evidence to back up some of the things that he said, and that's just a super fucking interesting chapter in American history. Yeah, what was the other one that just I'm reading right now the Confessions of an Economic Hitman, and that one's super interesting too because it's about this guy who worked in it was like this like banking company that was tied to the World Bank, and basically his job was to create like economic studies and like models and shit that would he would basically present them to like foreign countries to convince them to get like loans from the World Bank. And the World Bank, basically their loans had conditions like, oh, you're only allowed to use like American businesses for your like construction projects or whatever the fuck the loan is supposed to be used for. And then these companies, and then like the interest rate on those loans is super fucked up, and if you get behind on your payments, then like that shit increases, and you're basically in the pocket of the World Bank, and by extension like US corporations and fucking US interests as well. And so the economic hitmen are there to like convince you to do that, and if like they couldn't convince you to do that, then they had jackals that literally just assassins and shit that they used to take out fucking people in government that are not favorable to their interests. And so it's just an entire history of how all that shit happened from a guy who actually worked as an economic hitman and had sort of a change of heart and stuff. And he wrote the book initially, I think, in like 2005 or 6 or something. I heard about it when I was in high school, again as a lefty, but then he updated it in like 2015, I want to say. So like the new version is called The New Confessions of an Economic Hitman. And yeah, I got that on an audiobook, so I'm just like listening to that on my way to work and shit. So yeah, nice. It's like a 45-minute bike ride, and so yeah, I just fucking pop that on in one ear, and yeah, I'm listening to books on the way. But yeah, so my point with all that is basically that once you learn about these sort of like backroom things. Oh, and the other thing, technically not like libertarian or Austrian book would be Enough Already by Scott Horton and Fool's Errand by Scott Horton, because once you know like the history of like of our involvement in like war in the Middle East, especially in Afghanistan and all that shit, is just so wild in terms of how corrupt it is, like just how blatantly just Like there's no defending that shit, man. Like you've seen the videos on that, and that's like a small taste of the entire like tangled web of influences and shit. And
Yeah, that's just the tip of the iceberg.
and the stuff that you saw, I mean, that shit boils the fucking blood. You know, like our involvement in like the famines in Somalia, the fucking cholera outbreak in Yemen. Each one of those incidents on their own is like just some of the worst shit you've ever fucking heard of in your life. You know, just imagining what those people fucking went through. And to know that our state not only like was like kind of involved in it and shit, but like all they had to do in Yemen was stop changing the tires on the fighter jets that were bombing fucking water treatment facilities. Right? They didn't even have to stop sending bombs or stop doing. They just have to stop changing the tires on the jets, because those are like, you have to change them out every time they land, because you know, just like
Every single time.
It's you know that much friction, you know, is involved when you're landing those jets and shit. And so just stop changing the tires, stop giving them fucking tires, and suddenly, you know, people can maybe survive the cholera outbreak out there in one of the poorest regions in the Middle East. Well, it was before the war outbreak, it was the poorest region in the Middle East, you know, before all that shit. And so when you know that like the U.S. War state is involved in that shit so intricately and could so easily not be, you know, it's just like that level of corruption that you see. And then that, you know, so you learn about it from the fucking angle of war, you learn about it from the angle of like economic influence in terms of the corporate and the state merger. You learn about it from the angle of finances and the manipulation of money within the country. Like all those bits intertwined like made me more like anarchist, or made me more critical of the state than any like you know, book by Murray Rothbard, or book on economic or like anarchist ideology, like let's say in the abstract. Even though I do value like my reading and my education in that kind of area, I think it's you know, been valuable for me in terms of like being able to express my positions and why I think they're correct. But ultimately, like just seeing the state in action, right? Seeing how it currently operates and how it has operated the past 100 years is much more of like an eye-opener, I think, for not only for myself but just for most people, right? When you can point at, it's like Joe motherfucking Biden, you know, helped get us into Iraq, the motherfucker that is our president now. When you point directly at the guy and say, this guy has helped fuck us up in very specific ways, I think it's kind of more impactful. And what else do we have in news? History. Oh, right. Formula. Yeah, that was a thing I didn't know that, you know, we needed to put onto our bingo cards, but there's a shortage. What was the cause of it now?
Shortage of formula. I did see recently that allegedly Biden's doing something that's gonna reduce a bunch of shit that's basically just in the way of people getting formula right now. They're I guess regulations or something that they're just gonna kind of bypass to let people
yeah, I think it has something to do with importation. Like he was easing up importation restrictions, like, and he was
yeah, I think it was importation restrictions was the big thing. But yeah, somebody tweeted back at him like, if this shit just seems to be making it harder for people to get it, then why the fuck is it in the way in the first place? Like, why are these restrictions even around if the only thing that they really seem to be doing is making it harder for people to get this stuff in a crisis?
Yeah, so initially I think at least from what little I've read on it, by not enough mommy milkers, Polly says, that was what the cause of it. No, there was of course, there's supply chain disruptions overall that's been going on supposedly for the past 2 years, and a market characterized by limited competition. It's just randomly out of nowhere. exclusive contracts and few large suppliers. But then one of the largest manufacturers had a plant closed down and a voluntary recall after some people fell sick. Some kids got sick. It contaminated factories, wage and volunteerism says. And so they closed a factory that they thought was contaminated. They had a recall, and then that kind of kicked things into shortage mode. But we fear not, for we have a Twitch streamer communist to tell us exactly why this is happening. He's quote tweeting from President Biden, who's talking about, I guess, his measure to fly in more formula and to ease the supply, or not the supply chain issue, the shortages. But so Hassan Piker, Cenk Uygur of the Young Turks' nephew. Of the Young Turks is okay. I fucked up that sentence. Anyways, yeah, Cenk Uygur's nephew, Cenk Uygur of the Young Turks, his nephew Hassan, who's a famous millionaire communist on Twitch, the Twitch TVs, says capitalism is so wild that 4 companies control all baby formula, and the stuff they make overseas is not allowed to be sold here, even though EU standards are higher. So when one plant is shut down to avoid an FDA investigation, everything collapses and the government has to fly the formula in. One, of course, a market that's not allowed, to that's been restricted from selling here is very obviously not free market capitalism. So that's obviously the first thing that jumps out. Also, the plant shut down because there was infections, right? They responded to a suspected contamination by trying to contain the contamination, but he tries to frame it as if they're just trying to avoid being sanctioned by the government in some way. But it's just like,
which is funny, again, calling it capitalism and then immediately citing a shutdown due to government oversight doesn't sound like free market capitalism.
No, there's people obviously responding to him, defending him. I mean, there's plenty of people responding to him maybe the government shouldn't be in charge of that kind of thing. If 4 companies producing it is already a bad idea. But this fucking smooth brain is this happened because of the government, not capitalism. My brother in Christ, the capitalists are in the government, which again is just the dumbest fucking shit imaginable. Wage on volunteerism points out that WIC also awards monopoly contracts to a single brand per state. That's there's always government programs behind any monopoly that you see. And Paul says Hassan is straight up not a smart human. It's clear in his streams if you ever suffered through watching one. I've not gone on to his Twitch page, but I've seen plenty of clips of Hassan's streams, and my god, the absolute brain damage that you have to watch that for hours on end. I literally cannot believe that he gets tens of thousands of people tuning into his shit, because it literally makes you want to fucking drill into your own head having to listen to his fucking dumb bro jock shit, spout off just whatever first thing that comes to his brain in terms of takes, no matter how illogical or just how disconnected from reality it is. And so that's his contribution to this conversation is the fact that there's a restriction up to 4 companies controlling everything, and that just happened because capitalism is just chance. Just
like when they blame the price or the lack of insulin on free market capitalism, even though it's the law that only 3 companies in the United States are allowed to manufacture it. Despite the fact that the guy who invented the production of insulin, or at least the way we produce it now, didn't want it to be patented, wanted it to be a sort of an open source where people could just do it, specifically to prevent insulin from being price gouged. But that's free market capitalism, apparently. Yeah.
Yeah, and the hilarious part is that, you have people like us who constantly talk about what we envision free market capitalism to be and how we envision it to work. And all that kind of just gets brushed aside, and they're like, okay, well, no, the state doing stuff is now capitalism. It's like, okay, well, if fine, if you want to change the word, and then you want to, like, we can talk about, market anarchism, or just, anarchism with individualism, like whatever the fuck label you want to put on it. We're still not talking about the same thing when we're talking about, the state merged with corporations and, individualism. They're two separate fucking concepts, and so if you want to call it capitalism, then fine, you can call it that name. But at the end of the day, it's just not what we're talking about. It's not the same fucking thing. And so, can we just get on the same page in the conversation a little bit, please? Or just no? We just gotta play these semantic games instead. That's the fucking solution here. And so that's pretty much all I had on like news type stuff. But if you were down to check out Scott Horton absolutely smack the shit out of Bill Krystal in a live debate, then we could check that out, because it was a very fun video. I enjoyed it a lot.
Yeah, I'm down. I'm definitely down.
Cool. It was put on by Reason. Reason's okay. They can have some shitty takes and articles sometimes, but their live stuff, in terms of like events and like debates and things, they usually can be pretty fun. So yeah, we'll check that out now. And if anybody wants to stay and check it out with us, we're gonna get to it.
Bill Krystal, an editor-at-large of The Bulwark, went up against Scott Horton of the Libertarian Institute in an Oxford-style debate on U.S. foreign policy at Symphony Space in New York City. Krystal was a leading proponent of the invasion of Iraq, the founding editor of the Weekly Standard, a foreign policy advisor to John McCain's 2008 presidential campaign, and chief of staff to Vice President Dan Quayle. Scott Horton is the author of Enough Already, Time to End the War on Terrorism, and Fool's Errand, Time to End the War in Afghanistan. He's the editorial director of antiwar.com and the host of Antiwar Radio and the Scott Horton podcast. The debate was hosted by the Soho Forum, with Gene Epstein moderating.
Well, now for the major event of the evening. The resolution again reads, a willingness to...
By the way, I would recommend in general checking out the Soho Forum and like Gene Epstein and like the debates that he organizes, because he tends to get a lot of really good pairings and a lot of good like debate prompts and things for people to debate. And so yeah, he's got a lot of good stuff that he's put on in the past.
Intervene and to seek regime change is key to an American foreign policy that benefits America. Here to defend the resolution,
with Gene Epstein moderating.
Well, now for the major event of the evening. The resolution again reads, a willingness to intervene and to seek regime change is key to an American foreign policy that benefits America. Here to defend the resolution, Bill Krystal. Bill, please come to the stage. Here to oppose the resolution, Scott Horton. Scott, please come to the stage. Connor, please close the voting. The voting is now closed, and Bill Krystal, there'll be a timer in front giving you signals. You have 17 and a half minutes to defend the resolution. A willingness to intervene and to seek regime change is key to an American foreign policy that benefits America. Take it away, Bill. Yeah.
Thanks, Gene. It's good to be Good to be here back on the Upper West Side, not in Soho, even though it's misleadingly called the Soho Forum, I guess, or maybe it once wasn't Soho. I grew up less than a mile from here at 81st and Riverside, so I remember this is where we're at 95th and Broadway. I remember 96th and Broadway. I used to come and play pool and ping pong in some now destroyed, kind of old-fashioned guys and dolls type place that made me think I was really in touch with America there. I was an Upper West Side kid. So I have fond memories of this corner, fond memories of the Upper West Side. But in any case, apart from being back in New York, thank you for having us for this discussion. I think it's an important time to have a discussion about foreign policy. It hasn't been front of mind, honestly, since people like me who were concerned about democracy around the world found ourselves more concerned about democracy at home for the last 4 or 5 years and still concerned about it. I think they are connected, however. I do want to thank all of you for coming who are here and those of you who are watching it at home. I don't apologize, but I was going to say I feel bad that you all have to wear masks, but it's prudent, I suppose, and it's good that you're vaccinated, so it's nice that we don't have to, while we're speaking up here, do so, I've got to say. So, the resolution, as Gene said, I'll just cut.
Jesus Christ. We're all wearing masks. We're all vaccinated, but we're all wearing masks. Good Lord.
Sorry, I had myself muted for a second, but it's funny that also he frames it as that his desire, or at least for war and for advocating for war and shit, and his career as a war hawk has been out of a concern for democracy abroad.
For democracy, yeah.
And yeah, just this whole idea, and then suddenly he became concerned with Donald Trump 4 or 5 years ago, and so that was a concern, and he's it's like, well, we're talking about foreign policy again. We haven't really discussed that ever since Trump became a huge fucking distraction. It's like, yeah, I know, it's been fucked up, right? Like, should still be important because we're not in that much less war.
Cut to the chase here, since I know you want to have a substantive discussion, and I do too. A willingness to intervene to seek regime change is key to an American foreign policy.
Wait, John Valtrin says I'm about to go rabid gorilla on this moron, and he hasn't even begun the big evil talk yet. I know it's already, you can tell that he's just fucking, is a hawk through and through. I mean, people who know about America's history should know the name Bill Krystal. One, just because it reminds you of Billy Crystal, the actor, but so and the ironic part is that Billy Crystal, the actor, has actually read Austrian economics. Like, he's quoted Mises on his Twitter page before. He's actually based, and that was something that I never fucking expected. It was one of the most surprising things that I saw when I saw Billy Crystal had quoted Mises on his Twitter. Like, I had to go and track down the tweet because I saw it as a screenshot, and I was like, there's no fucking way this is real, and it totally was. But yeah, that's in stark contrast to his other namesake, the Warhawk, Bill Krystal here, and just how fucking much of a shitbag he is. Like, you will go want to go rabid gorilla mode on this motherfucker after you listen to his horrible fucking shit. And honestly, it'll just be enjoyable how hard he gets spanked, because he very clearly gets fucking destroyed in this debate.
That benefits America. I think this is correct. I think I would notice that it says a willingness to intervene. Doesn't mean you have to intervene everywhere. It doesn't mean there haven't been ill-advised interventions, but a willingness to intervene, which implies defense treaties.
And again, from I know we're stopping this super often, but there haven't been things that have been ill-advised. Like, we've helped commit genocides, bombed hospitals and civilians, but the most fucking weaselly way he can describe that is that it's we did some shit that's ill-advised. We tortured some folks. Shit happens.
These commitments to allies.
It wasn't the best
forward
idea, but
basing of troops.
you move on.
Yeah, sometimes we fund Al Qaeda, sometimes we fight Al Qaeda. Yeah, who's to say, what sort of things are good or bad? You know what? Maybe if you did it, it'd be treason, but if I do it, it's just, meh. Who fucking can say?
It's probably all the characteristics of the post-1945 post-war order. I do think is key to a safer world, key to a freer and more prosperous world, and a willingness to seek regime change, mostly peacefully, obviously, is key to a more democratic world, countries with democracies, with self-government, and with political and civil.
I'm sorry. This is just fucking so couched with absolutely horrific things being just rattled off as if they were the most normal thing in the world. Just like, we seek some regime change. Fucking peaceful.
Mostly peaceful regime change.
Mostly peaceful if we can. I mean, you know what happens when we completely dismantle a government and erect another one in its place? Like that shit just happens super peacefully, and just it's just like a normal.
Mostly peaceful regime change. I'm sorry, that's fucking too much.
This guy is such a fucking dickbag. Like, it's unreal.
Liberties. How to do that gets complicated, and I'll talk about that a bit. And civil liberties. How to do that gets complicated, and I'll talk about that a bit too. But I think the fundamental point, the willingness to stand with allies, the willingness to intervene if necessary, usually the willingness provides a deterrence. Occasionally it has to happen. A willingness to articulate that people deserve to live in freedom and that we should do our best to help them. And occasionally, if they're being oppressed sufficiently or if they're being invaded by others, we'll even act to help them, I think is key. And I think such a policy benefits America directly, but it also benefits the world, which in turn benefits America. So that's my core.
And again, he's couching this stuff in like weasel words like, well, we should be willing and, have to, the wherewithal or the chutzpah to do something if we need to, in case something should happen where we might have an interest in maybe bettering some things. And then you look at a chart of like the percentage of years that we've been at war, depending of like the percentage of your life that we've been at war, depending on like what year you were born. And like if you were born anywhere in like the past like 25 years, it's been pretty much 100% of your life we've been at war. And like it's just. Okay, you might say like this is like a willingness and a maybe and like what this and that, but like in reality it's just like constant fucking warfare on like with no clear end in sight. That's what's actually fucking happening. Yeah, it's like how we do it gets complicated. Yeah, I'm sure calling Lockheed and Raytheon on speed dial is complicated, my guy. Exactly, wage and volunteerism. Like these guys have full control over how much war happens, and they choose more war because it's more money in their pockets. It's more money in the pockets of those defense contractors who like only exist to provide weapons for the U.S. Yeah, that percentage chart is my favorite. I hate it. No, exactly. It's so fucking just infuriating. But it's important. I think that people should see exactly how much war we've been conducting over our entire lives and over the past fucking 80 years or so.
Our argument is a pretty straightforward argument. I honestly think it's a pretty. I think it's correct. Obviously, I mean the key judgment people have to make is. What do you think of the post-1945 world order? If you think, as I do, that on the whole it has been a good thing, that if you compare it with the preceding 45 years, it's undoubtedly produced a world more peaceful, more prosperous, more free, greater social liberties for all of the terrible problems. But compared to the preceding half century, I think you have to say this has been a good half century, a good 70 years or so, by comparison. All these things are by comparison. And that key to the success economic successes, successes in life expectancy, successes in political freedoms, success in just keeping the peace, success in not having another use of nuclear weapons in anger since 1945. Those successes really depended on this American-led world order, which in turn depended on a core defense structure, foreign policy structure, national.
What was that? So did you say something?
No, did it?
Oh, no.
Did you get some feedback?
Yeah, I think I heard some sound. Or maybe it might have been like some typing or something. No, but yeah, this guy is so fucking. Everything he's saying is just fucking wrong. It's like there's no other way to put it. It's just this rose-colored fucking like fantasy vision of what happened, like what the US government did post World War II. It's just kind of amazing that you have like adult fucking humans that just have this sort of depiction of what the US government did after World War II. It's an amazing thing to behold.
Security structure of which the U.S. was the keystone. I think it's actually a great achievement. Historians will look back on the post-1945 first Cold War order and then post-Cold War, even post-9/11 for the last 20 years, and say underappreciated at the time, lots of challenges at the time, lots of mistakes at the time, but compared to what? Compared to what? One of the most important things in life, but I say especially in foreign policy, is not taking for granted that bad things, very bad things sometimes, did not happen. So it's pretty easy to look at the world and see particular instances of failure, particular places things could be better, particular things that one wishes one had done differently in retrospect. But if you step back and say, all in all, what does one think of this post-World War II liberal order, global order that we have undergirded? I think one has to say, as I say, peace, prosperity, but also think of the things that didn't go wrong, the things that didn't happen. And, you know, the Soviet Union did not prevail in the Cold War. Liberal democracy spread intermittently and with some setbacks in the last 15 years, but to countries where it hadn't been before. Prosperity was expanded massively. I mean, the achievement of helping hundreds of millions, I guess billions of people come out of poverty, especially in East Asia, obviously, and Southeast Asia, and China and India and surrounding countries. That does not happen without the undergirding of this American-led liberal global order. It's their achievement. It's mostly an economic achievement, but their achievement depends, I think, on a general world in which they are not fighting wars every 10 or 20 years, as they certainly were before that in East Asia and elsewhere. It depends on a free trade and free movement of capital and ability to learn lessons in terms of international economics, which in turn is undergirded by that liberal world order. So we take that for granted as if, well, it was obviously the case that, you know, India, China, all these places were just going to develop in the way they have. It was not obviously the case. It hadn't happened before. And I don't think we can count on it having happened if we had withdrawn from the world as we had done in 1918 or as we had done prior to 1914 in certain ways. But we certainly couldn't count on it being sustained. We had a pretty good liberal world order until 1913, 1914, but it turned out not to be reliably enough undergirded. I think we have provided a kind of ability to sustain that kind of liberal world order that didn't exist before, and that is really not something to be taken for granted, and not something to be whose importance can be slighted. Intervention is messy. There have been good interventions, in my opinion. There have been obviously ones that didn't go well, that were problematic, and I think the verdict will be mixed. There have been ones that have been mistaken. The earliest ones, Korea and Vietnam, were by far the most costly for us. Korea may be necessary, certainly part of the outcome of that. A very successful, booming free country, but not so happy a story, obviously, in North Korea at all. Vietnam, a much less successful, obviously, intervention. The subsequent ones, one could go through them and try to weigh them. I'm sure everyone's interested in Iraq, which I was a strong supporter of, and remain a qualified, I would say, supporter of. Obviously, we were wrong about weapons of mass destruction, so we would not have gone to war if we had known they weren't there. But still, I would say that the
they were
light
just
in
wrong.
which we
They
went
didn't
to war
lie
in
about
Iraq
it.
was, for me at least personally, I won't speak of everyone else, the experience.
Well, yeah, because remember the claim wasn't that like, oh, you know, we think that there's weapons there. It's like, nah, they're for sure fucking there. Like, we know that we got the locations of where they're at and everything. And we're telling you, the American people, we need to go in and take them out because this is a fucking vital importance. It's like see, this is what I'm talking about in terms of weasel words, right? Weasel words are just anything that like you try to use to like obfuscate or to like generalize or to like soften the blow of what the fuck is going on. Weasel words are famously used by the media whenever a fucking cop shoots somebody and they're like, well, there was you know, a suspect was shot in an officer involved shooting, right? Not the cop fucking shot this dude for no goddamn reason. You know, they're not gonna say that, so they have to use the weasel words of you know, well, this guy was shot during an officer involved shooting, and say this is the same type of shit that this guy is doing in terms of, it's like, well, there were certain interventions that you know, were ill-advised, and you know, they were maybe kind of a mistake, or you know, some bullshit. And it's just it's like, nah, there's some war crimes going on that at least Obama was fucking straight up enough to be like there was some torture going on. And yeah, that's just, you know, you can't be a fucking Washington Warhawk without learning how to properly just fucking weasel your way out of war crimes, out of admitting to war crimes. Yes, let's listen on.
Experience after the Cold War of Saddam invading Kuwait and just, you know, killing really hundreds of thousands of his own people in the years before that. And after the intervention, when we didn't go and remove him and insist on regime change, we let him hold power, kill people, redevelop some weapons of mass destruction. It turns out we destroyed a lot of those in 1998. And then in the Balkans, we did nothing as Milosevic engaged in ethnic cleansing in Europe. We finally intervened there, and reasonably successfully, I would argue. And since then, for 20 years, since 98, 99, after the second intervention in Kosovo, we have not had that kind of slaughter in Europe. And we, in fact, achieved an awful lot in Central and Eastern Europe, where there hadn't been too much history of liberal democracy and freedom. Some backsliding, unfortunately, in the last few years, and especially in Hungary and in Poland. And that just, for me, makes the case, though, why it's so important that we stay engaged and stay active. And NATO puts a lot of pressure on these countries, incidentally, to maintain their democracies, a lot of incentives for them not to slide back. The fact that we have enemies like Putin, or opponents like Putin, who've grown up, again, for me, makes the case for that fundamental willingness to assume our role in the world, not to try to pull back. I mean, I would just say this about interventions without, you know, trying to escape from the difficulty of them. When I was very much younger, someone made the point that if the Allies had intervened, if the UK and France had intervened in 1936, when Hitler went into the Sudetenland, it would have been a total mess. And if they'd insisted on a regime change, it would have been very difficult in Germany. And people would be looking at that 2 years later, or maybe 15 years later, as, gee, was that really necessary? And that, you know, you've got to be careful when you intervene. You got to step back, let things take their course, let things play out. You don't know what would have happened if we hadn't done certain things. We do know what happened in Syria when we did not intervene in 2011, and then in 2013 with the Red Line. And we know that 500,000 people have been killed and millions of people driven from their homes, a migration crisis, which then destabilized Europe, incidentally, and probably helped the rise of authoritarian populism elsewhere in the world. So the intervention can have bad consequences. The war in Iraq was fought terribly for the first 3 years, and I think we did stabilize it by the end of 2008 with the surge, but I'm perfectly open to the argument that all in all, it would have been better if we hadn't gone in. I think it's hard to know. You can't rerun history backwards. What would it have looked like if Saddam or his kids were in charge and they were developing weapons of mass destruction as they had tried to in the past? We don't know. But I certainly will acknowledge it was not a well-run intervention and maybe not a well-thought-through intervention. Still, Syria is the counter-argument of a non-intervention, and I think one has to take that counter-argument at least seriously. People like me were very influenced by the experience of the Balkans, and I would say also by the experience of Rwanda in '94, where at that point we were kind of exhausted. We had intervened in Somalia in '93. That went badly with Mogadishu, and we just, really neither party and almost no one in the US said, oh my God, we can't just sit back and watch what happened in Rwanda happened, and 1 million people got slaughtered. And that was preventable. That was preventable by us and by others, and we didn't prevent it. And I remember 6 years later watching Al Gore and George Bush debate in 2000 on foreign policy, and the anti-interventionist mood was still in the ascendancy. Bush was chastising Clinton for too aggressive a foreign policy. He was promising a more humble foreign policy. And one of the moderator, Jim Lehrer, said, well, would you have intervened in Rwanda? 1 million people died there. Wouldn't have taken that much to stop that, or at least to stop some of that. And Bush said, no, we can't just solve everyone else's problems. And Gore, who certainly didn't agree with that, I think Gore felt very bad that we hadn't intervened, said, oh no, we can't intervene. His political advisors had said there was no support for intervention. 9/11 changed that. We went into Afghanistan, I think correctly. Maybe we should have left earlier. Maybe we certainly could have done some things differently. We then went into Iraq. Those are the two post 9/11 interventions, really. And again, we don't know what the world looks like.
Maybe we should have left early. So this again is in October of 2021, which is after the actual withdrawal from Iraq, which everybody knows happened horribly.
Oh God, yeah, it was fucking catastrophic, and the amount of shit that they left over there.
Oh yeah, millions, billions. I think it was billions.
If we pull out of Afghanistan earlier, I hope it doesn't go too terribly there. Now, I worry about what happens there in terms of the people of Afghanistan. I also worry what happens in terms of regional destabilization in Pakistan and elsewhere. Pakistan's a nuclear power. I come back to the nuclear question. Very few people predicted in 1945, after Hiroshima and Nagasaki, that there would be no use of nuclear weapons for what is it now, 75 years, except for our tests. And that's an achievement. And who knows whether we could have been less forward-leaning and stopped other nations from getting nuclear weapons. But the reason Japan is not a nuclear power is that there's a US-Japan defense pact. And a defense pact means willingness to intervene. That's literally what a defense pact means. And the reason South Korea is not a nuclear power is probably that we have troops there, as well as having a pact with them. And if they both were looking at China and there were no US troops in the region and no US commitments, they would be nuclear. And you have to then say, what does the world look like? India and Pakistan have nuclear weapons. China does. That's dangerous enough. South Korea, Japan, do others decide? I think we just underestimate the cost that would be paid if the US stepped back from its global commitments. A couple of quick points in closing. Can we afford to be the global superpower? Yes. It costs, I don't know what our defense budget is now, about I think 3.5–4% of GDP. Let's just add 1% or 2% for intelligence, State Department, all the other costs of being a global power. 5–6%. It's just not. It's worth it, in my opinion. If other people think it's doing harm to the world, you can make that argument. But it's not. It's not that we can't afford it. That is just not a really important argument, I think. So we should argue it on the merits, I think, rather than this kind of notion that we're going bankrupt because of the defense budget. Is the national security state been terrible for us at home? Has it, eroded civil liberties? It's sort of a cliche that the national security state, the war is the health of the state, and it's very dangerous to civil liberties, to freedom, to civil rights. It can be, and there's certainly instances of that at the end of World War I, and then, of course, with Japanese internment, for example, in World War II. But really, the story from 1945 to 2015 in the U.S. has been one of expanding equality, expanding civil liberties, certainly on core civil rights issues, for example, partly spurred in some respects by the fact that we were telling the world they had to be democratic, and then people correctly, I mean, the communists, Soviets said, what about you? Look at the way African Americans are treated in the US. And that was actually a bit of a spur to improving our country. It's not a reason, obviously, to have the global responsibilities, but I think if you just step back and say, is there less freedom of speech on a ton of issues we care about, freedom of religion, it has not been the case that at least the post-1945 American global presence has led to some kind of erosion of liberty in the US. We can argue about the size of government in the US and all kinds of issues, but it's just not empirically true that we've become some kind of garrison state, hostile to freedom, hostile to social progress.
I mean, this is after we know about like the NSA spying and like illegal wiretapping, like all this other shit that's been going on. The fucking, what was it? Obama using god dang IRS to target political enemies. It's like yeah, in like the global and historical sense, we're relatively free as a nation, but that's not to say that like fucking government interests, especially in the war state, don't do some really shady shit and curtail as much freedom as they can possibly get their hands on.
And so forth. And finally, I just think for those who say, well, but all this is nice for the world, but what about America? American democracy, American freedom is not solid, is not, I think, ultimately, you can't count on it in a world that's entirely hostile. We have a big interest in having other democracies in the world for the sake of those people, but also for the sake of our own confidence in ourselves, and that we don't become a garrison state constantly thinking that all over the world there are countries that might attack us. So I think even from the point of view of democracy at home, not even, but including, not just from the point of view of people living abroad, but from the point of view of Americans at home, we have a big interest in democracy around the world.
Thank you, Bill.
Wage on volunteerism saying this guy is so terribly unprepared for this debate. If this was a written persuasive essay, he'd fail extremely hard just on structural merits alone. Yeah, no, he did absolutely fucking horrible. It was pathetic in terms of just like a persuasive speech. Like on its own, it fucking sucked. It was unconvincing. Even the parts that he like made stances on, and then he like predicted possible like criticisms, but they were the most like fucking milquetoast. It was the milquetoast like characterizations of the opposition, and also in terms of even his addressing of that. He's like, well, you could make the case for that, and that's certainly something you can do, and I guess I just sort of disagree about that sort of a bit, and that's what I think. Okay, well, it's not very fucking convincing at all, buddy.
Not even a little bit.
No.
For the negative, Scott Horton. Take it away, Scott.
All right, thank you, Gene. And hello to Mr. Krystal. As some of you know, Mr. Krystal was chief of staff to Dan Quayle, who I consider to be the best vice president of my lifetime. And think about who the other ones were for a second there. I will respond about Hitler and World War II more in a later segment there. America is in real trouble. For the last few years, my opponent has been at the forefront of those warning against the death of modern liberalism, and that far-right populist Trumpism is taking this country in a very dangerous direction, towards authoritarianism, even dictatorship. But Mr. Krystal, you and David Brooks promised us national greatness. You said America needed to be called to their, quote, grand destiny, quote, nationalism. We needed, quote, national strength and moral assertiveness abroad, advancing the cause of freedom around the world. We needed a big project we could all do together. As Brooks' friend Christopher Beam wrote, invading Iraq, quote, suited his quest and yours for this greatness. In his 1996 article, Toward a Neo-Reaganite Foreign Policy, arguing for benevolent global hegemony, my opponent wrote that John Quincy Adams was wrong that the U.S. should not go abroad seeking monsters to destroy. Why not? He asked. For the exact reasons that Quincy Adams delineated. Our principles would turn from liberty to force. We would become the dictatress of the world, but no longer the ruler of our own spirit, he said. Adams was right. The wars did not make America great. The wars. 3,000 people were killed on September 11th, 2001. As Paul Wolfowitz admitted, the main reason Osama bin Laden cited for attacking America was the U.S. military bases left in Saudi Arabia for the so-called dual containment policy against Iraq and Iran in the 1990s after Iraq War I, the Persian Gulf War. Bin Laden's plan was to provoke the United States into invading Afghanistan so he could replicate the Mujahideen's earlier success against the USSR with U.S. support in the 1980s. This time against us, to bog us down, bleed us to bankruptcy, and create a choking life for the American people under the tyranny of our security state. And after the last 20 years of war in Afghanistan and across the Middle East, we have less influence there than ever before. A $30 trillion national debt, an increasingly invasive surveillance state and militarized police state, almost 7,000 dead troops, 37,000 if you count those who killed themselves in the aftermath, and the worst partisan, political, racial, and other social division of my lifetime anyway. I'm 45. So much of this crisis is directly due to the costs, financial and otherwise, of America's Middle East regime change wars. Let's review some recent regime changes and their consequences. Note that in neoconservative doctrine, democracy absolutely must be spread to Afghanistan, Iran, Iraq, Libya, and Syria, but not Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, Qatar, Kuwait, UAE, Oman, Egypt, or Pakistan. And if there's a democratically elected government that our government doesn't like, the U.S. won't hesitate to try to overthrow it, like in Algeria in 1993, Gaza in 2007, Egypt in 2013, and Ukraine in 2004 and 2014. Now, to the regime changes. I'm sorry I have to skip Kosovo and Somalia for time. First on our list is President Carter and Reagan's support for the Mujahideen in Afghanistan in the 1980s to overthrow the communist regime there. This led directly to the rise of Haqqani, Hekmatyar, the Taliban, and al-Qaeda. Carter and Reagan's support for Saddam Hussein's Iraq in its 1980s war to overthrow the Ayatollah in Iran also backfired. It solidified the mullah's power in Persia and led directly to the so-called Gulf War, after Iraq invaded Kuwait in a dispute over debts from the war against Iran. As mentioned, America's first Iraq War, launched to restore the Kuwaiti monarchy in 1991, led directly to the dual containment policy against Iraq and Iran from military bases in Saudi Arabia and al-Qaeda's war against the United States. Since 2001, after failing to deploy enough reinforcements to capture or kill bin Laden at Tora Bora or allow the Delta Force to pursue him into Pakistan, the Bush administration instead sought regime change against the Taliban in Kabul, who Bill Clinton had supported just a few years before in their own regime change against the Mujahideen warlords whom Presidents Carter and Reagan had supported against the communists in the 1980s. This led to 20
I love when that history is told that like rapid fire, because it's so like just nakedly corrupt. I want to walk that back again.
Change against the Taliban to pursue him into Pakistan or kill bin Laden. The Bush administration instead sought regime change against the Taliban in Kabul, who Bill Clinton had supported just a few years before in their own regime change against the Mujahideen warlords whom Presidents Carter and Reagan had supported against the communists in the 1980s. This led to 20 years of war, including a massive so-called surge escalation halfway through for absolutely nothing, and leading to the Taliban walking right back into power as the U.S. withdrew in the summer of 2021. Saddam Hussein in Iraq War II. When David Wormser wrote his clean break plan for Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's first government in 1996, he acknowledged that targeting secularist dictators, Hussein and Assad, for regime change in Iraq and Syria could further fan the flames of Islamist anti-American terrorism. But he said the solution to that problem would just have to wait until the war against them was over. Maybe in 1996, this was somehow understandable, from a Hawks perspective at least. According to Richard Schultz in the Weekly Standard, in the 1990s, the Pentagon Joint Staff would repeat as cliche that, quote, terrorism is a small price to pay for being a superpower. But after the African embassy bombings of 1998, the USS Cole attack in 2000, and September 11th, which killed nearly 3,000 people in New York and at the Pentagon, it was less understandable. Yet the neoconservatives, led by Mr. Krystal, persisted. The neocons' best laid plans to empower Jordan and compliant Shiites to take over Iraq failed. The American invasion of 2003 empowered Iran's favored factions among the Shiites, the Supreme Islamic Council and Dawa Party. In fact, it was King Abdullah of Jordan who coined the phrase Shiite crescent to describe Iran's newly enhanced power just after the invasion. Clean break, nothing. This American Shiite alliance pushed their Sunni Arab enemies out of Baghdad and into the arms of al-Qaeda in Iraq, which did not even exist before the war, adding thousands of hardened fighters to Osama bin Laden's movement, including thousands of foreign fighters who traveled there to fight against the U.S. Shiite alliance. Many of these men later went home to Libya, Syria, and Yemen to get ready for the next wars there. The U.S. took their side in all three. In Libya, the Hawks said they had to intervene to overthrow secular dictator Gaddafi to protect the poor civilians. But at the very least, tens of thousands of people have been killed in endless fighting in that country in the decades since. Bin Ladenite groups, veterans of the Second Iraq War, led that revolt and have thrived in the meantime as civil war has raged for years. Some warlords brought back literal chattel slavery of sub-Saharan Africans. Thousands of refugees drowned in the Mediterranean. The war spread from Libya into Mali, Chad, Niger, Sierra Leone, Burkina Faso, and Nigeria. Obama's and allied support for the bin Ladenite revolt against the secular government in Syria, an attempt to weaken their ally Iran after the Iraq War had done so much to empower them, led to the rise of the Islamic State so-called caliphate in eastern Syria and western Iraq, and then the third Iraq War from 2014 to 2018 to then destroy it. On behalf of those same Iranian-backed Shiite groups, the Hawks wish they hadn't fought the second Iraq War for. No, the U.S. should not back these dictators, like so-called President Sisi in Egypt. That's part of what got us attacked in the first place. But we sure as hell should not be supporting bin Ladenite insurgencies against them either. Hillary Clinton and Saudi Arabia's installation of Mansour Hadi when they co-opted the Arab Spring revolt in Yemen in 2011 and 12 led straight to the next phase of the war, which broke out in 2015. For the last 6.5 years, the U.S. has backed Saudi Arabia and UAE in a war that has killed hundreds of thousands of people and also strengthened al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula beyond belief. There are now something like 30,000 bin Ladenite fighters in the world. And Iran and Russia, who intervened to save Assad from al-Qaeda and ISIS, are more influential in the region than ever. This is not how it was supposed to be. Speaking of Russia, it isn't just the Mideast wars. In Georgia, the U.S. supported the Rose Revolution of 2003 and the installation of Mikhail Saakashvili, who almost got us into a war with Russia when he attacked their peacekeeping forces in South Ossetia just 5 years later, and Vice President Cheney urged George Bush to strike Russian forces coming across the Caucasus Mountains. The U.S. also helped to overthrow the government of Ukraine twice, in 2004 and 2014. In 2014, they used actual Nazis in a street putsch against the elected government. It was supposed to be easy to get away with while Putin was distracted with the Sochi Olympics. But instead, the new Ukraine coup junta lost Crimea to Russia and started a brutal war in the east, which has killed more than 10,000 people and unnecessarily ratcheted up tensions with the other most powerful nuclear weapons state on the planet.
Wonder what happened there. I'm sure that turned out just fine.
I'm sure
Then
it's
National Endowment for Democracy head Carl Gershman even threatened regime change in Moscow itself in the Washington Post in October 2013. Secretary of State Hillary Clinton famously blessed the Honduran coup of 2009, leading directly to the rise of murderous drug cartels in that country and a massive child refugee crisis at our southern border. The American establishment had its so-called unipolar moment at the high water mark of U.S. influence to lead the world into the brave new future at the turn of the millennium, and they blew it. The U.S. government has spread not liberty, but the tyranny of the majority, not free markets, but corrupt crony contracting, not peace and security, but mass sectarian violence and destabilization. This has led to increased support for left and right-wing socialism around the world in reaction. Liberalism and democracy, in the broadest sense, have been discredited as meaning nothing more than supplication to American demands or cheap excuses for our violent intervention. The economic crisis and refugee crisis resulting from our Middle East wars has led to the rise of the populist right in Europe, where they are ascendant in the European Parliament. The UK has left the EU, and the unraveling of the entire so-called liberal international order, even in the West, has begun. In your 1997 National Greatness piece in the Wall Street Journal, you wrote that the universal principle at the heart of the American ideal is a mandate to, quote, advance freedom, end quote, around the world, apparently by any means necessary for the world's own good. But means determine ends. And even if somehow waging violent coups and regime change wars across the planet could guarantee freedom for those people, it would necessarily come at the expense of those whose lives and liberty our government is actually sworn to protect, ours. No wonder that here in America as well, people are moving to the socialist left and nationalist right, since the disastrous consequences of militarism and regime change are what passes for liberalism in the center. The backlash from Bush's disastrous wars and the devastating economic crash of 2008, a direct result of the Fed's militarism-friendly, easy money policy in the preceding decade, led to the disruptive and destabilizing presidency of Barack Obama, his disastrous wars, and the so-called K-shaped economic recovery of his time in office, meaning bankers and think tankers paid by defense contractors did great, while the people on the bottom three-quarters of the economic ladder remained stuck in 2009, led directly to the election of Donald J. Trump, running as an economic populist and war skeptic over W. Bush's brother and Barack Obama's Secretary of State. His election was a reaction against the military and economic legacy of the preceding 15 years and its central liberal establishment champions, including the neoconservatives. And who? A guy who built his political capital proclaiming on talk radio that Obama was a secret pro-terrorist Muslim from Kenya. In other words, your nemesis, Trump, was exploiting your movement's previous cultivation of this sort of illiberal sentiment among Republican voters back when it was still useful to your ends, building support for the wars. Now that the anti-Muslim chauvinism of the American right is no longer useful, you claim the right itself is now the greatest threat to democracy. If so, this is the nationalist movement the neoconservatives have done so much to cultivate and promote. For bin Laden and his friends were few, but would-be enemies who happened to be Muslim were many. So Bush and the neocons supported the worst sort of right-wing populist nationalism in America, especially with their wink and nod approach to the Muslim-hating hacks on AM talk radio. It was central to Karl Rove's plan for his permanent Republican majority. That was a big part of why my opponent was so determined to bring Sarah Palin on board with John McCain in 2008. She could get the rubes excited and afraid and keep them and convince them to continue to support the McCainian neoconservative doctrines behind the long war in the Middle East. It's why your friend Frank Gaffney pretended to believe that a small Sufi mosque in a building down the street from the old World Trade Center site was supposed to represent the Muslim enemy's triumph over America, or that the 50 states needed to pass emergency legislation to protect us all from enslavement under Sharia law. This deliberately deceptive campaign did much to make the right worse. Now the centrists are terrified of the populist right, accusing them all of being neo-Nazi white supremacists, including many tens or hundreds of thousands of men and women who are resentful veterans of the wars you lied them into. And in turn, the populist right is terrified that the war on terrorism is now being turned against them as the Department of Homeland Security redefines violent extremism to mean almost any political activity outside of the two major parties. The people, in return, resent the power of the establishment, which so despises them even more. And now, the average guy is supposed to believe that the last quarter century's greatest proponents of American empire, such as Mr. Krystal and Dick Cheney's daughter Liz, herself an avowed hawk and promoter of torture, are the last principal defenders of the old republic they destroyed. Who's buying that? Engagement, leadership, primacy, preeminence, hegemony. These are just euphemisms for world empire, with the USA in the position of the hated British that our forebears had led the world in overthrowing. The doctrine that the middle part of North America should be or could be the dominant military and political power in Eurasia and indefinitely is crazy on its face. And plus, the whole thing is really just a racket. As the soldiers call it, a self-licking ice cream cone. In other words, a government program creating its own disasters it must then attempt to solve. No nation on earth threatens the United States. As Ron Paul once told the Washington Post, we could defend this country with a couple of good submarines. The U.S. Constitution does not authorize this posture of global dominance. The people of the world do not want it. The American people's costs are in the trillions, and our gain is non-existent. We suffer the terribly destructive, inflation-generated boom-bust cycle and endlessly rising prices. The feds rifle through our internet and phone records. Our sheriff's deputies act like special operations forces at war in our neighborhoods.
Your time's up, Scott. Good. Yeah. Good.
Can I,
One more second. Go again. Yeah, one more second.
sorry, I'm almost done.
Oh, well.
Our sheriff's deputies act like special operations forces at war in our neighborhoods. Our soldiers and Marines come home maimed physically and mentally, and more terrorists are motivated to attack the United States. There's a widespread feeling in America that liberty, justice, fairness under law, and cooperation and compromise through little d democracy is now untenable. Hatreds between sectors of society have become much more solidified. More people speak of secession and separation. The people are finding out the hard way that you cannot have it both ways. There is no such thing as a limited constitutional world empire. There cannot be a balanced budget, a free and prosperous economy, independent major media, or rule of law in a state of permanent war. No, okay. We Americans, I'm almost done. Give me just a sec. We Americans are losing our freedom in the name of forcibly spreading it to the rest of the world. Enough already. Let's defend America first, end all aggressive wars and covert interventions in other nations, abandon our empire, and put the protection of liberty in our own country at the top of our political priorities. Then, shed of all this violent hypocrisy, we will be able to lead the world in the only legitimate way we can, by the benign sympathy of our example. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay.
And sorry for going over.
Bill Krystal.
And Wage on Volunteerism asks, Tom, did Horton watch your butcher's guide? Because that was a slaughter. And yeah, dude, like the stark difference between the amount of information given and how persuasive it was, and just the deftness in which it was delivered is fucking astounding. It's a very clear gap.
Well, I mean, this is just something that jumped out at me. Like, he believes what he's saying. He believes in what he's saying. He's prepared to defend it. He understands his opponent's position.
Oh yeah, because the thing is,
Chris, dude he's just kind of an apologist. He just really sounds like he's just parroting a script. Like, he has no fucking idea what he's really talking about here.
Well, the thing about Krystal is that he can't actually give the like the government reason for wanting to conduct these wars, because that's like rooted in, of course, like a thirst for power, a thirst for dominance. I mean, all those things that Scott Horton was talking about, right? Is that he's got to come up with a publicly palatable excuse for these wars, and so he has to use soft language, he has to use generalities, he has to walk back certain things because he knows that the facts don't actually agree with what he's saying, and so that's why he has to be like, I do think it's been these wars have been good and constructive for democracy and stuff, and sure, there's been some times where we've made some mistakes and some ill-advised actions, and so he's got to constantly backtrack and make sure that he doesn't overstate his case too positively, because he knows that it doesn't actually stand up in the face of our actual history, and so he's got to couch all of his language in hedging language and like I said, the weasel words and stuff, and he can never actually firmly declare anything, because I mean, it's just the fucking history is not on his side.
It's really not.
You get an extra 2 minutes for your rebuttal, but you can take this podium for your rebuttal, maybe best. Yeah, okay. Take it away, Bill.
Kind of a lot to rebut there, but I will. No, that's okay. I think I'll just let the 2 minutes go. The Middle East is a very difficult part of the world, and we've obviously made many mistakes there. I think one of the mistakes we made was not pushing democracy hard enough when we had real leverage.
I love this fucking guy.
I'm not a defender of the Saudi regime. I was kind of mocked in 2002 when I said that I thought a consistent policy for freedom in that part of the world would anticipate and even work towards the end of the dominance of the House of Saud in Saudi Arabia. And I continue to think, and I was certainly critical of both the Trump and Biden administration for being too soft on MBS, for example, for arranging for the killing of an American resident, Jamal Khashoggi. So I've been, same with Sisi, same with Pakistan. I would be, if anything, I think in the Middle East, which is so difficult though, and which we look at and then get understandably shrink from the consequences of really a kind of even liberal imperial role. And so we tend to pull back, and we tend to, for understandable reasons, prioritize short-term security, peace, anti-terror, which is awfully important. It's not nothing that we haven't had another 9/11 in 20 years. And we probably don't do enough to promote liberty and democracy. Mr. Horton didn't seem to acknowledge the importance of the U.S. Commitments in Europe and in Asia to defending democracies where they exist, to creating them where they didn't exist, to expanding them where they exist, and to the general peace and prosperity of both regions, which is not something that had marked them historically for the preceding part of the 20th century when we weren't involved much. It's not as if we've never not been involved in the world. We've not been involved in the world and very conspicuously chose not to be involved in the world after 1918, and we saw how that worked out. Now maybe it's not the same, and we could have done things differently, and it wasn't inevitable that what happened in both Asia and Europe were to happen. But I think one at least has to somehow sketch out how our withdrawal from the world would not invite much greater aggression on the part of autocrats, much greater oppression at home on the part of dictators, totally unfettered by any fear of U.S. pressure, U.S. sanctions, U.S. Soft power, let alone U.S. hard power. So I really think that would be a very bad world. At the end, Mr. Horton tried to sort of say, well, he's sort of vaguely for liberty around the world too, but actually it wouldn't be good for liberty around the world, and I don't believe it would be good for liberty here, for the reasons I briefly indicated. I do believe that it's not, well, let me put it this way. The people who care a lot about liberty in the U.S., really care about liberty, seem to me mostly to be people who also care about liberty around the world. They could differ somewhat on how much we can do, whether, as Joe Biden thinks, we should withdraw from Afghanistan and use more diplomacy and hopefully not have to fight Middle East-type wars. I'm uncertain about that future. I agree with him, on the other hand, in maintaining the alliances in Europe and Asia. But I would make this point. Talk to actual liberals, small L liberals, people who believe in liberty around the world. Talk to actual Democrats around the world. How many of them want the U.S. to withdraw? Even the ones who think the U.S. has been unwise in their countries, and I've discussed this with many such people, often in the Middle East, in Pakistan and Saudi Arabia, don't think the answer is, well, if you just left, things would really get better. Quite the contrary. It's that we're not doing the right thing, we're not doing things carefully enough, we're not being intelligent enough in the way in which we promote liberty. Those are all fair points. And the idea that somehow any people, real people around the world, whether it's, and I thought it was unfortunate that Mr. Horton repeated, in effect, pro-Putin talking points about Ukraine. I sympathize with the Ukrainian people who were invaded by Putin's Russia, and the idea that Putin wouldn't do more if the NATO, and in fact Ukraine was kept outside the NATO guarantees, gave up its weapons, its nuclear weapons in '94, great victory, incidentally, for nuclear nonproliferation, because we in Britain kind of guaranteed Ukraine they wouldn't pay a price for giving up those weapons. They were nervous about Russia even then. We didn't do much when Russia invaded. We at least were able to contain it to a part of Ukraine. But again, the evidence for me is that it's U.S. retreat that invites aggression, not excessive U.S. intervention that invites aggression or that makes life more miserable for more people. Again, interventions individually, we can debate how to do it, we can debate. Wars haven't gone away because of the U.S. maintained global order. The Middle East in particular is a very difficult part of the world where the transition to modernity has been very problematic in so many ways. And maybe we should have been more cautious in the Middle East about what we could do. Though again, I would just point out the places where there's been an unbelievable amount of slaughter in the Middle East that we weren't involved in one way or the other. One thinks of the Iran-Iraq war, where the sophisticated establishment types in Washington were sort of, well, let them just kill each other. That actually didn't work out well, and also hundreds of thousands of people died. And Syria, the refugee crisis, is a product of non-intervention in Syria, of not doing what Obama said we would do. The use of chemical weapons against the Syrian people has not been, Assad has paid no price for that, and he's still in power, and that's a horrible signal to send, a horrible precedent to allow to be set in the 21st century. So I unapologetic in defending, leave aside I guess I could defend my 1997 piece, but I don't really remember it that well, except the national greatness we were for was a greatness in defending and promoting freedom. And I am for that kind of national greatness. I am for a healthy debate in our free democracy about how to do that. I am not for Trump-type national greatness, which cares not at all about political and civil liberties.
Thank you, Bill. 5 minutes of rebuttal from you, Scott. Take it away.
Okay. And sorry for going over before. When I practiced, I read it fast, I guess. All right, a few things here in
There. It's muted on stream. Yeah, that was another absolutely pathetic attempt by Bill Krystal at defending American greatness and hegemony abroad. I don't know. It was just fucking dumb. He tries to focus again on us like keeping the peace in Europe and in Asia with our military bases in like Japan and shit. And the Middle East is just it's just messy, you know. And maybe we just should have just done a lot more, but except for
it's not our aggressive foreign policy that provokes people to attack us. We were just hanging out in these countries, not doing nothing, and then when we left, the bad guys attacked us.
Yeah, no, exactly. He's just and a lot of language, of course. Again, couching language using generalities. Fucking had to slide in some Putin talking points, of course.
I like that he accused him of using Putin talking points. That's funny.
Yeah, because he has he rightfully mentioned the Nazis and the U.S. backed Maidan fucking coup, where we saw John McCain photographed. It's like, oh yeah, that's a Putin talking point. John McCain fucking standing right there.
Yeah, it's
But
like it is interesting to see that that's that old of an argument that if you mention anything about it, it becomes a pro-Putin talking point. We're not even fucking talking about Putin. We're literally just acknowledging that the United States established a Nazi regime in Ukraine. Like, that's a factual thing that fucking happened. Just because Putin is using it as an excuse to invade does not invalidate the fact that it happened.
yeah, no, exactly. It's the Putin's actions is a separate, completely separate fucking thing from whether or not that shit actually happened, and it did. But yeah, let's watch Scott absolutely fucking crush him again.
No particular order, but first of all, the Second World War obviously hangs over all of this. America defeated the Nazis and the Japanese, and then created this post-war order that Mr. Krystal's referring to here. But the thing of that is, as you guys all know, I'm sorry. As I think everybody knows, as even Winston Churchill himself said, it was Theodore Roosevelt and especially Woodrow Wilson's intervention in World War I that caused World War II. World War I was ending as a stalemate before America got involved and tilted the powers so far in favor of the Allies and against the Central Powers that, first of all, they prolonged the war long enough for Lenin and Trotsky, no offense, to seize power in Russia and create the Soviet Union, and they empowered the British and the French to inflict the Versailles Treaty on the Germans, which stripped them of all of their territories and demanded all these reparations that destroyed the economy and led to the rise of the Nazi power, the Nazi Party, on the promise of getting revenge for what had been done to the Germans at the end of World War I. If America had just stayed out, there would have been no Soviet Union and no Nazi Germany to fight World War II at all, okay? As far as what happened in Ukraine in 2014, America sponsored real Nazis, not just neo-Nazis, but the proud grandsons of the Galatian SS who had perpetrated the Holocaust in Ukraine against Jews and Poles there. The right sector, the Svoboda Party, formerly called the Social Nationalist Party, and the Azov Battalion, all of whom proudly fly swastikas and commit crimes against minorities in Ukraine. And it was Ukraine that attacked the East. Once they overthrew the government, the Donbass region in the east of the country, Donetsk and Luhansk, they decided, well, if you guys are going to overthrow the government we elected in a free and fair election in 2010, then we're just going to occupy all the government buildings and refuse to recognize the new government. Then the Kiev regime attacked them. They called it the War on Terrorism. And they invaded the eastern part of their own country. And yes, it's true that the Russians did send special operations forces across the border to help them, but they never did invade the country at all with regular infantry. And when in 2000 and I think late 14 or early 2015, the people of the Donbass region voted in a plebiscite to join the Russian Federation, Putin told them no. He had no interest in absorbing their territory whatsoever. He would only provide them enough help that they needed to keep the Kiev regime out, and that was it. You also heard, and this goes back to his original statement at the beginning here, that the U.S. has kept the peace in the world for 75 years. And he did mention Korea and Vietnam, and that's all, but he didn't mention that we killed 2 million Koreans, somewhere between 3 and 5 million. Nobody really knows how many Vietnamese, Laotians, and Cambodians were killed. And then, of course, the domino fell. It was knocked over by America and spread communism to Cambodia and led directly to the rise of Pol Pot and another 2 million dead there. He didn't count the 1 million dead Iraqis or the 1 million dead, and I got to talk about Obama's intervention in Syria. He didn't talk about the 1 million dead Iraqis, the 500,000 dead Syrians and Pakistanis and Afghans and Libyans and now Yemenis, where at the very minimum, 250,000 people have been killed. Certainly in the war in Somalia, which helped lead to the famine of 2011 through 13, something like 250,000 people died in that famine, most of them children under the age of 5, just like who's dying of cholera in the war in Yemen, inflicted by the Americans and their allies who bombed the hospitals, bombed the water and the sewage and the electricity and all of the means of civilian support there in that country. And now it's just not true, and I don't know who told you this, but you might know that Edward Snowden leaked the black budget to the Washington Post, and they published it. Obama spent $1 billion a year on the war in Syria, and he admitted it. Jeffrey Goldberg asked him in March of 2012. He said, don't you think that if we got rid of Assad in Syria, that'd be a good way to bring Iran down a peg? And Obama said, absolutely. And Goldberg said, well, is there anything more that you could be doing to speed this process along? And Obama said, well, I can't tell you, Jeffrey, because your classified clearance isn't high enough. And we all know, because even the Washington Post and the New York Times admitted it over and over. America, Saudi, Qatar, Turkey, Jordan, and Israel all supported al-Nusra, and their allies, Jaish al-Islam, and the other bin Ladenite groups there. These were the Syrian veterans of Iraq War II. And America took their side because the government that they were fighting was friends with Iran, which had no role in knocking our towers down.
Time's up. Yeah. Well, thank you for.
And you can see how like difficult this is for Scott, not because he doesn't know how to respond. It's because there's too much fucking shit that you have to talk about and have to draw upon in order to respond to there. It's like, my God, you said the Middle East is messy. Let me fucking tell you about messy, buddy. And yeah, you can go on for quite a bit. Like he even just like rattled off some of the same shit that I was talking about. How I was like, listen, like when you're talking about, the readiness to intervene, we're talking about fucking a military that has like helped slaughter Yemenis, spread a cholera outbreak, like to do all these fucking just horrific fucking things. Like it's absolutely demonic, like in terms of just like how fucking evil you have to be to defend this kind of policy and this kind of structure to America's role in the world militarily. It's just fucking disgusting.
Both. We now go to the Q&A portion of the evening. We have 2 mics over there. You can line up to ask your questions. And we have questions from the streamers. I want to take my moderator's prerogative to ask a question of Scott. I believe Bill Krystal has basically asked you for a counterfactual. And of course, you guys are sometimes talking about more than a century's worth of military foreign policy. I'm wondering, Scott, if you could take it from 9/11. Like there was a question, 9/11 happened. Let's assume that everything up through 9/11 also happened. You didn't change that part of history. But now, from 9/11 on, Bill is really challenging you to say, what is your alternative to what went on? What could have happened from 9/11 on? What?
Well, I'll cite the great Harry Browne, the former libertarian presidential candidate and great libertarian activist. I asked him on my show, Harry Browne. Did you hear me the first part?
Yeah, go on.
The great Harry Browne. I asked him, well, what would you have done? And he would have called off the policies that caused the attack in the first place. But assuming the attack, what he would have done was he would have negotiated in good faith with the Taliban, who hated bin Laden and al-Qaeda and wanted rid of him, instead of refusing the Taliban's offers to negotiate, as George
look at Bill Krystal's face. Because the thing is that like the common neocon and a fucking line about the Taliban was that they were this like evil, like oppressive, like Islamist faction that like supported al-Qaeda terrorists and helped basically conduct the attacks on 9/11, which was not fucking true. The Taliban was a an Islamic like government party, but who they allowed Al Qaeda to exist there, but they didn't support like their war against the U.S. and their attempt to goad America into war in the Middle East. Instead, they were ready to give up bin Laden when America was looking for him after 9/11. And basically the fucking Bush administration did everything within their power to basically make it so that there was no winning the negotiations. They would say things like, okay, well, the Taliban wanted to extradite bin Laden to a Muslim country first of all, and then they're like, nah, and then they're like, okay, well, we'll extradite him to any like neutral country, and they're like, nah, and it's like, well, any country that's like allied to the United States but like not directly the United States, and they're like, nah. It's like every time the Taliban tried to provide any sort of conditions on the extradition of bin Laden and to giving him up, the U.S. fucking, or the Bush administration was basically like, nah, fuck that shit, and they would not budge in any sense in the negotiation. They wouldn't negotiate. They were just basically like, these are the conditions and that's fucking it. And even when they had like agreed to it, they had made sure that it was like under circumstances that they couldn't even fucking, like, it was basically bin Laden got into Pakistan, and even that, like, his escape into Pakistan was something that could have easily been prevented, like Scott Horton talked about briefly in his like first speech on it, like here in the debate. He's talked about like the fucking, was it the Delta forces who were asking to back up or to pursue him into Pakistan and all that kind of shit. And so yeah, he could have been captured back in like the end of 2001, and with proper negotiations with the Taliban and with just decently logical fucking like military pursuit of bin Laden. Like, they knew where he was, they knew where he was going. They could have easily fucking ended all this shit back in December 2001.
For almost a solid month in the lead up to the start of the war. And barring success on negotiating extradition, he would have sent special operations forces to capture or kill bin Laden and his few hundreds, no more than 400 members of Al Qaeda there hiding with bin Laden at Tora Bora in Afghanistan. And then he would have called the whole thing off, and especially including the entire policy of American dominance in the Middle East. That was the cause of the problem in the first place. Our bases in Saudi, our support for Israel and their unending violence against the people of Palestine, and at that time of Lebanon. And if we had just called all of that off and proved to the world that we are what the Statue of Liberty says that we are, and that was Harry Brown's thing, the Statue of Liberty. And if we had, really worked hard to perfect liberty in our own country and to spread it by example, and in fact, Harry Brown was an evangelical libertarian. He was determined to see liberty spread around the world, and he was determined to give his Statue of Liberty speech. He would have given it every day if he'd been the president, about how we are doing everything we can to perfect the application of the Bill of Rights in our society. And your societies out there in the world, your bills of rights aren't good enough. And you need to try at least as hard as we are trying to create a free society for our own people here. And then, instead of wading in a swimming pool of the blood of innocent people, looking like the world's worst hypocrite, it would have been great. And it would have sounded great to the people of the world. Remember, on September 12th, they held a 1 million-man candlelight vigil in downtown Tehran on behalf of the people of the United States. We had the entire world ready to listen to America, ready to join up in our cause. But it wasn't the right cause. It was, hey, you know what we could do? We could get a bonus war. If we could just lie to these people, and we'll just publish in the Weekly Standard over and over and over again that Osama bin Laden and Saddam Hussein are friends, and Saddam's going to give weapons of mass destruction to Osama bin Laden to kill you and your mama in your hometown if we don't preempt them and stop them from attacking us first. Let's do that. We could get away with that. People are so upset about the 3,000 dead New Yorkers, we could exploit that grief and fear. And we could overthrow whoever we want now. On to Baghdad against who? The guy in the French beret and the clean-shaven chin and the olive green military uniform, who they could have just sent Colin Powell. The Secretary of State at the time was a 4-star general, former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. I think he was tough enough to handle Saddam. And if not him, how about mean old Donald Rumsfeld? They were old friends from when he helped arm Iraq in the 1980s under Ronald Reagan. They couldn't have just gone over there and read the riot act to Saddam and put him in line? No, remember Dick Cheney said, we can't talk to evil because that will, justify it. And that will, Saddam Hussein, like he wasn't already the dictator of Iraq since 1979. That will give him legitimacy and credibility if we talk to him. We have only one choice, to attack Iraq before they attack us first. Yeah.
Bill, please take the mic up. And do you want to comment on Scott's reply?
Our policies did not cause 9/11. Our policies did not cause Assad to use poison gas against his own people and kill 500,000 of them. Our policies did not cause Putin to kill journalists and to crush freedom in Russia. I mean, Mr. Horton may believe that the U.S. is the source and cause of evil in the world. I disagree.
No.
Okay. I don't know if you want to have
I like how even Gene was like, that seemed pretty fucking weak. Okay. Whatever, bro.
Fucking response. Literally just, no, I don't agree with that. No. Like, are you fucking kidding me?
Well, it's because they always, the Hawks always do this, especially with the 9/11 accusation. They like to, again, be as general and as extreme as possible. They're like, our policies did not cause 9/11. And it's in one way, I suppose that could be sort of true, but the thing is, and the real truth is longer to state, right? Is that like the people who planned 9/11 were motivated by, military actions that they viewed as, interventionist and unjustified. And somewhat rightfully so, because we didn't actually have a legitimate reason to be fucking there and have bases in Saudi and shit like that. And so it's like, the truth of the matter sounds, complicated, because it fucking is, right? There's no like simple, our policies caused 9/11. I mean, in one way we could state, like, you could be fucking, or you could be, fucking Hassan Piker and say America deserved 9/11, which is not fucking true. Right? It's like the people fucking the towers of New York didn't deserve to fucking die that day, just because of military policy, right, that they had no fucking control of, because most people didn't even know what the fuck was going on. They viewed the 90s as like a time of peace, all right, which is just fucking amazing to think of, given how much war happened during the 90s. And so yeah, he's able to stand by those like just generically firm statements, right? Because they're not actually that firm. It's just they're trying to remove context and remove and kind of paint the opposing like belief as like extreme as possible, when it's just fucking smoke and mirrors.
Go ahead. Yeah, and then we'll. Yeah.
Well, the men who did 9/11 were responsible for 9/11, but they were motivated by American foreign policy. And I actually just went back and watched the CNN interview of bin Laden from 1998 or 96. And the whole story is, well, they hate our bases in Saudi Arabia and our support for Israel. Back to you in the studio, Jimmy. Because nobody said they hate us for our freedom. They hate us because their radical Islamic beliefs make them hate those who are good and innocent and beautiful and love their mama. No one had told that lie yet. So it was just plain and simple.
You think the Taliban are doing what they're doing right now in Afghanistan because they hate, what do they hate? We got out of Afghanistan.
Well, the Taliban aren't attacking us. I don't know what you're talking about. They were attacking us until we left, and then they stopped.
No, I'm saying, do you think that there's going to be liberty and freedom, that young girls in Afghanistan will have opportunities and the like?
No. Okay, I don't know what the point of that was.
Well,
The point of that is that liberty matters around the world, that bin Laden was not provoked by, I don't believe, our having some bases in Saudi Arabia that we had had for an awful long time, or by our supporting Israel, which had been there for an awful long time.
You don't believe that because you don't know anything about it, I guess. Why don't you read the Declaration of War from 1996 and 1998? Or, you know what, better yet, read Perfect Soldiers by Terry McDermott. It's the biography of the Hamburg cell of 9/11 hijackers. Don't interrupt yet. Hang on a second. Mohammed Atta, the lead hijacker on September 11th, he joined al-Qaeda, decided to join al-Qaeda and attack the United States when Israel invaded Lebanon in 1996 in Operation Grapes of Wrath. And a couple of months later, Osama bin Laden put out his declaration of war, declaring war against the United States and ranting on and on about the Qana massacre of 106 dead civilians killed by the Israelis hiding in a UN shelter. And that was when Mohammed Atta and his friend Ramzi bin al-Shibh decided they wanted to join al-Qaeda. They then went and traveled to Afghanistan, met bin Laden, joined the group, and were recruited to carry out the planes operation against the United States of America. So even if you want to pretend to believe that all bin Laden cared about was that we didn't all want to convert to his religion or something else, his recruitment shtick was, these people are hurting our people. Simple as that.
Bill?
There have always been injustices in the world which allow evil men to recruit others to work to serve them. I mean, obviously Hitler took advantage of Versailles. I think, again, that was us stepping back, incidentally, in 1919, not imposing something on as much as maybe we should have to make sure there was a more just peace. The fact that evil men take advantage of past injustices, grievances, insoluble conflicts does not mean that we then withdraw and hope that those evil men do nothing evil?
It means we should stop doing evil and terrible things that provoke them.
We did. Well, that's ridiculous. That's where I'm just, okay, fine. I'm just going to say, I do not believe that we did evil things that provoked 9/11.
Okay, thank you both. That was a good and lively exchange. And now we are going to put it over to questions. Please don't identify yourself. Just ask your question as a question. If you want to address it to one or the other party.
Again, it continues to be fucking comical just how fucking outmatched Bill Krystal is compared to Scott Horton.
Say so, but otherwise ask the question. Please take it away, sir.
My question is for Mr. Bill Krystal. Clearly, American foreign policy is in the great pivot to China. We have two major fighter jets being designed right now with China in mind. We have aircraft carriers being designed with China in mind. Right now, we sail pretty often our Nimitz-class carrier into area that China considers their waters. And there's 6,000 souls on board those Nimitz-class carriers. And China has missiles that can strike them. If we were to lose one carrier, that'd be 6,000 dead. That's two 9/11s in one afternoon. What would be our response if in current American foreign policy? And wouldn't one of the things on the table be a nuclear exchange? And at that point, aren't we rolling the dice on the great sword of Damocles over us?
Thank you for your question, Bill.
I mean, China is a big challenge to the U.S. It's very unfortunate that the bet on liberalization in China, which was not a crazy bet, that economic involvement would encourage political liberalization, may have worked for a while, has now been reversed by Xi. We have defense obligations, obviously, to Japan, Taiwan, and elsewhere. And I do think, in general, those aircraft carriers have maintained the peace. And I mean, just empirically, they have maintained the peace, I would argue, in an area of the world where there are deep enmities and where there have been terrible, terrible wars, not quite in our memory, but in the memory of our parents and grandparents. If we were to withdraw out of fear, and it's an understandable concern, obviously, that let's say there would be a Chinese missile attack on one of our carriers. I mean, I think we can deter that without using nuclear weapons or even threatening the use of nuclear weapons. But if we were to withdraw, we would have, I mean, Japan would certainly go nuclear. Other countries in the region, South Korea, I think even Taiwan, if they had a chance, would decide there's no U.S. defense, Australia, the U.S. defense commitments have no credibility, and that creates a much more dangerous and much more unstable world. I mean, if you want to create a world that has the conditions that then leads to an endless cycle of violence, I would say the U.S. can just withdraw from Asia, we can withdraw from Europe, we can give up on our efforts in the Middle East, and we will have endless cycles of violence, as we've had in so many, in those parts of the world before, in the 21st century.
Comment, Scott?
Well, it doesn't make any difference one way or the other to the American people who rules Taiwan. And nobody wants to see violence. It would be terrible if China invaded and people were killed there. No one wants that. But if the Chinese rolled into outer Mongolia, does anybody in here think that America should intervene, start a war to protect Mongolia from Chinese aggression? Or there's some things that are just out of our purview and out of our jurisdiction and cost too much? And by the way, you know, back to the cost, Mr. Krystal has said repeatedly just how affordable all of this is. But our national debt is $30 trillion right now. We spend something like $1 trillion a year on militarism if you count the VA and the care and feeding of the nukes at the Energy Department and the rest of that. We absolutely cannot afford it. And if you ask the people who lost, people in the wars or in the terrorist attacks against this country in the meantime, their costs are a lot higher. Now, you know, if you have a think tank that's financed by arms manufacturers, then these are good times, and you don't probably understand what anybody else has to worry about. But there is severe, as they call it, economic anxiety in this country, mostly caused by the boom and bust crash cycle that we have. They call it the business cycle. It's the inflationary money cycle. And the reason they keep expanding the money supply is to make the world empire seem free. For all those checks he was cashing, they never raised his taxes once in the highest bracket because they just borrowed the money from China and printed it instead. And so then regular people are blowing their brains out because they're forced to carry this economy on their back.
Okay, next question over there, please. No.
My question goes to Mr. Krystal. Recently, you wrote in an article at The Bulwark commenting on some of Biden's comments around Afghanistan recently. Quote, Biden concludes his anti-war discussion by reminding us that there's nothing low-grade or low-risk or low-cost about any war. But this isn't true. Hard-hearted though it may sound to say this, some wars are much more low-grade or low-risk or low-cost than others. So first, Mr. Krystal, could you define a little more specifically what you view as low grade, low risk, and low cost, and then point to a specific intervention, say in the last couple or few decades, that you view as meeting that criteria and having been successful?
Yeah, I think the Balkans intervention, I would say. And obviously, I mean, look, I'm anti-war. I hate the idea that we would send, and most Americans do, the idea that Americans are yearning to send young men and women abroad to fight. That's not the case. If anything, it's the opposite. We're a large commercial country. We enjoy, and as we should, pursuing happiness here in the United States. We have oceans protecting us. We don't have a long historical tradition, as maybe we have some tradition, of course, of fighting on this continent, not always justly, obviously, but we don't have the kind of European-type history. And so Americans, I think, on the whole, refrain from wars. And it is good to have an American president, honestly, and I think almost every American president falls into this category, who is reluctant to send young Americans off to war. But if you think, as I do, that occasionally the threat of war, and even more occasionally, less occasionally, I guess I should say, war, actually engaging in war is necessary, then you have to obviously try to confine them to less costly wars, both economically and much more importantly in terms of the human cost, and importantly also in terms of the after effects, the sort of what messages get sent. So I would say the Balkans would be one case of a war that was worth it and that I think had pretty good consequences in Europe, and I would compare it to the non-intervention in a place like Rwanda or Syria.
Scott, comment?
Yeah, as Yugoslavia was breaking up, they actually had struck a deal where the Bosnian Muslims and the Croats would have a coalition, and they would be the majority, and the Serbs would be the minority partner in the coalition. And they signed on to that and accepted that. It wasn't until American Ambassador Zimmerman intervened and told the Croats to not take the deal, to ruin the deal they'd already accepted and instead go to war. You can have more. And that was what turned the, what was already a disaster in the Balkans into the absolute catastrophe that, he's claiming that America solved. It was the American ambassador who helped to cause that thing in the first place. And I'm sorry, I meant to mention earlier real quick here, when I was talking about the 2 million dead in Korea and the 3 million in Vietnam and the 1.5 million or 2 killed in America's Middle East wars just in the last 20 years, the people who always get left out of that are the people of Indonesia and East Timor and Bangladesh and Guatemala, of course. 500,000 dead in the civil war caused by the American coup in Guatemala. And of course El Salvador and Nicaragua, all throughout the Middle East. And these are essentially massacres and pseudo-genocides, even in some cases, perpetrated by American puppets, American compliant governments, governments protected by the United States of America. For example, Gerald Ford gave the green light for the massacre of the East Timorese in Indonesia in 1975. Richard Nixon gave the green light for the Pakistanis to carry out their atrocities in Bangladesh, and et cetera, et cetera. He always says, not just tonight, but always, America has kept the peace for 75 years. Are only white lives important? Does it only matter that Russia hasn't fought Germany again? And these other people's lives just don't count? The USA has killed a Holocaust worth of civilians.
Okay, let's summarize it there, Scott.
75 years.
Let's summarize it there. Next question. Yeah.
Sorry. A hypothetical question for you, Mr. Horton. Let's say you are the resident of a totalitarian nation like Australia, and let's say 10, 20 years pass, they're still locked down, the rest of the world is back to normal, they are still under lockdowns, you live in Australia. Would you like America to intervene to come save you in totalitarian Australia?
No, absolutely, I would not want that, and especially looking at the consequences of American intervention there. But, I think there's going to be a very strong reaction in Australia, and they are under an absolutely authoritarian lockdown system right now, but they still have regular elections, and at least for now, I guess we'll see. But I am predicting the resounding defeat of everybody in charge of that country now after they have pushed things so far. But one more thing, too. If Americans, individual citizens, want to go overseas and participate in somebody else's conflict, like the Spanish Civil War, or you want to go and help liberate the people, the Iraqis enslaved under the Dawa Party now, then you're free to go and do that. Just leave me out of it. Thank you.
Bill, do you have a comment on Australia?
I'm going to have a comment on a discourse that trivializes the Holocaust by saying the United States has conducted Holocaust, that attacks, that demeans the United States in really a grotesque way. If we made mistakes, did we give, as you say, green lights or yellow lights when we shouldn't have? That could be. Talk to people from East Timor, though. Talk to people from Bangladesh. Do they want the U.S. to just withdraw and leave them to the mercies of their neighbors, or would they prefer for the U.S. to have done more and to be doing more? And as we have done more since, incidentally, the Pakistan and Bangladesh split off from Pakistan, doing more to keep the peace there. Talk to people who care about liberty around the world. They understand that for all the mistakes we make, and that we are important to them, to their peace, to their prosperity, to their liberty. People of all colors, I would say, all ethnicities, all religions. Of course, our intervention in the Balkans was on behalf of Muslims. Our intervention in Iraq and Afghanistan was on behalf of Muslims, and our departure from Afghanistan has unfortunately left many decent people in Afghanistan who worked with us, but more importantly, worked for themselves and enjoyed the relative freedom of the last 20 years, now worrying that they may never have a chance at that again. I hope we can do it diplomatically, help get decent people out who've worked with us. That's our moral obligation. And I also hope we can diplomatically, perhaps, help work for an outcome there that's less bad than, unfortunately, the outcome looks like it might be. But that's, again,
I wonder
think
whatever
our
happens with
intervention,
that.
both diplomatic, economic, as well as, if need be, occasionally military, is so important around the world. But just again, the notion that, Australia may have foolish COVID protocols now, and people.
And one thing that I found hilarious about this whole bit was the fact that that guy who initially asked the question of Bill Krystal, he was like, "Listen, name me in your own terms of a success, right? Just name your terms for success in terms of a military intervention, and then name me a place where we have had success. In terms of in your terms, under your standards." And the best he can fucking come up with is the fucking Balkans. Like, honestly, like, how fucking pathetic is that? Like, that of an answer, even just granting that that's like legitimately a good answer, that isn't couched in some U.S. fingertips being involved there. Even if that wasn't the case, the Balkans, that's the only one where you were like, yeah, we did. Who fucking gives a fuck? Okay, I mean, the people there do.
About how that's like totalitarianism, but that's ludicrous, honestly. And
Yeah,
a discourse that can talk about a U.S. Holocaust and about authoritarian. I'm not sure what term was used, so I don't want to characterize it, but talk about Australia even in a semi-joking way, in the same way one talks about genuine dictatorships that kill dissidents and really oppress minorities in horrible ways. People who can talk cavalierly about that, I don't know what to say.
Next question.
I don't get to answer?
Jimmy, what?
Yeah, on trivializing the Holocaust, our government, led by the neoconservative hawks, call every opponent of the American government Hitler. Noriega's Hitler, David Koresh is Hitler, Saddam Hussein is Hitler, the Ayatollah Khomeini and Khamenei are Hitler. In fact, just 6 weeks ago, H.R. McMaster said that for Trump to have negotiated with the Taliban, that's just like Neville Chamberlain negotiating with Hitler. Well, that to me sounds like it's trivializing the Holocaust. Either Hitler was a unique danger or he wasn't. And I would say that he was. And I would say that when they bring up Adolf Hitler, the exception that proves the rule, in every single case where America has to intervene. Oh, Muammar Gaddafi, the guy from the Naked Gun too? Yeah, no, we got to get him too. He's Hitler too. They're all Hitler. Speaking of trivializing the Holocaust.
Comment, Bill? No. You want to pass? You want to pass?
No.
Okay, you want to pass. Question.
Historically, it seems that empires don't last.
Question.
Yes. So the question is, do you think world civilization has changed, that the United States would be exempt, or do we end up like Rome, England, Spain? Which one of them? Where do you see us going?
Look, historically, republics don't last either, unfortunately, and so I don't know.
Because they turn into empires.
Oh, okay. Let him finish, Bill. Scott.
Yeah. So what is the implication of that? We need to keep a republic. We don't have an empire. We have I called it benevolent hegemony to be provocative, but we have a liberal world order, which our power does undergird. I'm not backing away from that. I'm not, glossing over that. Are we overstretched? Were we overstretched? Were we overambitious in what we tried to do in the Middle East? Perhaps. As I said earlier, those are tough calls. But again, the problem then, I think, was a little bit too much ambition in promoting liberty. Not that we should not promote and defend liberty where it is. And there are a lot of, to look at this world and to say that it's a site of U.S. holocausts and and of liberty being crushed everywhere and the U.S. rampaging around. Again, ask people who like liberty, whether they're in Europe or in Asia or in Latin America, if they just want the U.S. to leave, or if they think that the U.S. should play a more active role in helping them secure the freedoms, which are universal freedoms. They are universal freedoms.
I seem to remember quite a lot of them actually just wanting us to get the fuck out of their country.
Yeah, no, he's fucking delusional, or again, he's doing the same sort of Warhawk thing where he's just like, I'm doing this behalf of the people who live there and shit. Just ask them. I'm sure they love me. I'm sure they do. But yeah, no, they fucking don't. They never fucking did. People there aren't stupid. They know how the U.S. is involved in their lives being destroyed, and yeah, they're not fucking done.
Universal. We need to protect them here, obviously. So we can be a republic, but also, I would say, if you want to use a provocative term, we can be at once a republic and a liberal empire. That's what the founders thought, honestly. And I think we have done a decent job of it for 250 years, and I think we can keep on doing it, hopefully, for another 250 years.
May I take moderator's prerogative to pick up on Bill's point made a few times, to throw it at you, Scott? Bill is basically saying that a jury of people who live in many of these countries, they support American presence, and so that's his challenge to you. What do you say to the idea that people in East Timor and elsewhere want the U.S. to be involved? What's your response?
I've never heard of someone from East Timor wanting the U.S. to be involved.
Or
I'm sure
elsewhere.
that when Mr. Krystal travels around to European capitals, he meets with people who like the American presence there. But the idea that means, I don't know, somebody show me the opinion polls in Bangladesh and, for that matter, in Eastern Europe that say that they want the Americans there. And if, let's say, they hold another plebiscite, this one that America respects, in Ukraine, and 99% of the people in Ukraine want the United States military there, but that increases the chance of a war with Russia, then who cares what they think? This is our country. And you know what? If I lived in probably any country in the old world, just the same as I live in this one, I would want to improve it. But that's on them. And I do agree that liberty is a universal principle. Of course it's a universal principle, but it must be locally enforced, because you see what happens when the USA, if you want to say that America is the best at it out of anybody, when the USA acts as the world government, they kill millions of people in the name of doing good.
Bill, do you want to respond to that point? Do you want to wave? Okay. So let's see. We have this side. I think this is going to have to be our last question. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Sure. This is for Mr. Krystal. So there have been, you claim there have been successes and failures of the post-1945 world order. How much worse would the failures have to be, or how meager the successes would they have to be for you to say it wasn't worth it, we would have been better off keeping ourselves isolated?
I mean, it's a good question, and obviously one can't rerun history for 75 years. No, I think, nuclear weapons being used several times, Europe descending back into war, as it had twice in the preceding half century, in the subsequent half century, the Cold War ending with nuclear exchange or massive conflicts of ground troops in Europe instead of the collapse of the Soviet Union, thanks to our partly thanks to our pressure, partly thanks to Gorbachev seeing that the Soviet system wasn't working, and the power of example that Mr. Horton cited also working. But the power of example doesn't go away because we have troops in Germany making sure that the Soviet Union can't foolishly decide one day to try to expand the bounds of the Warsaw Pact. If East Europe hadn't become, Central and Eastern Europe hadn't become free, if we hadn't achieved the goal of a Europe peaceful and free, if Taiwan and South Korea hadn't become democratic nations, I think if Japan weren't still a democratic nation 75 years after. So I think if all those things had gone south, or some of those things, obviously the balance would look very different. The Middle East is the toughest place, I will grant. I don't think we've made things worse there. I don't think we've made things as much better as I would hope, though I am still hopeful. The Arab Spring, which for various reasons didn't work, so to speak, we didn't do as much to help as I think we could have. Maybe we were exhausted after Iraq and couldn't have done much more. But it shows that people there do yearn for freedom, and I do think there's much more we could do diplomatically and in other ways, civil society, to help even in the Middle East, which is probably the toughest part of the world for my case.
Comment from you, Scott, on that question? Yeah.
Well, it's NATO expansion in the post-Cold War era is the greatest threat to peace in Europe now. And we now share, the NATO military empire. Hillary Clinton said the Russians are doing exercises right on NATO's doorstep. She meant inside Russia, because NATO has moved their doorstep all the way to the Baltic states, right on their border. And in the Trump years, they actually had military exercises within just a couple of hundred yards of the Russian border. That's not keeping the peace. That's putting the entire species at risk.
Thank you, Scott. That closes the Q&A. Bill, Krystal, 7.5 minutes of summation. You want to take the podium again? Yeah?
No, it's okay. I can do it for you, I think.
Okay.
I'm going to be brief, partly because I do have to actually catch a plane, as Gene knows, and I don't want to, therefore, and I apologize if I seem to rush out and not mix and mingle, since there might be friends here from the Upper West Side and elsewhere. I mean, we have such a fundamentally different view of the world. I'm not sure that we've been able to convince each other. I'm sure we've not convinced each other of anything, and I'm not sure we've convinced many of you in this kind of debate. I guess I'll just say this. You know what? It's better to make one's arguments assuming good faith on the part of the people with one whom differs, one's opponents, and assuming that maybe they're wrong, maybe I'm wrong. I mean, that last question I think was a very fair question, and one could elaborate on it in ways that I probably haven't thought of and make more of a case that we made more mistakes than I realize and that things would be better if the U.S. had been less ambitious, if we spent less on defense, if we pulled back from the world, or not. But the idea that, people that what Mr. Horton calls the neoconservatives or whatever don't want the right kinds of outcomes is as ridiculous as thinking libertarians or whoever's for, a republic, not an empire, and for no American intervention anywhere don't want decent outcomes. I think they're naive. I think they don't understand the way the world would work, and I think they don't learn the lessons from history they might otherwise learn. But I understand that most of those people don't go around rooting for dictators to crush dissidents or for countries to remain in terrible poverty or for ethnic minorities to be brutally slaughtered, as in Xinjiang. I don't accuse people who favor a more dovish policy towards China of thinking that it's great that China has concentration camps for Muslims in the East. But I think making arguments, therefore, on the actual substance, the actual consequences of policies, assuming that the great majority of us on all sides want the right thing is a better way to make arguments.
We usually recommend the podium, so Scott might as well take the podium. You have 7.5 minutes, Scott.
Are we still going to have a chance to ask each other a question, too?
No, it's over. 7.5 minutes of summary. Take it away, Scott.
All right. Well, I'll email you, Bill. All right. I think I've made myself pretty clear. So this thing is kind of busted. Instead of recapping, if you'll allow, I'd like to just bring up a couple of things that I had to cut from my opening statement for time there. Is there any real benefit to the American people from our policy of global domination, including regime change? Perhaps access to oil and minerals? Certainly not. Roger Stern, an economic geographer at Princeton University, published a study in 2010 which determined the U.S. had, quote, misallocated $8 trillion between 1976 and 2007, protecting the sea lanes in and out of the Persian Gulf when oil's safe transport was never really under threat. We spent a few more trillions since then. This is far more than Americans even spend consuming Middle Eastern oil. Even if somehow we could just scoop up all the oil and walk away with it, as Donald Trump seems to believe, it could never be worth the cost in blood and grief or the opportunities lost when people turn away from America for acting in such a ruthless manner. They are occupying and stealing Syrian oil today. Elon Musk celebrated the coup against the popularly elected government in Bolivia in 2018, crowing on Twitter that it's great because he needs their lithium for his Teslas. His company may have played zero role in that coup for all I know, but the U.S. government moved quickly to support it. And that still raises the important question, what is America's national interest over the long term? And is it good for the rest of us when selfish, narrow special interests justify violent intervention in other people's countries for their own good in the short term? And let's just presume that the financial gains far outweigh the costs when companies like Freeport-McMoRan are able to run off with all of West Papua's gold, even accounting for the taxpayers' cost for U.S. government involved there. What shall it profit a nation if they gain the whole world and lose their own soul? By committing horrible, deadly sins against helpless people. Part of the problem here is that the neoconservatives and their neoliberal counterparts never really understood what liberty was about in the first place. It's a great way to finance a PNAC, But Pentagon contracting is not the free market. It's corrupt crony capitalism. And due to the economic deformations of America's permanent war system, the most wealthy counties in the country now are not here in New York City, but in the suburbs of Washington, D.C., where our supposed public servants live and work. And the richest in this city, as all Americans and the rest of the world know, are all market-proof due to the so-called Greenspan put. They get bailed out by Congress and the Federal Reserve System every time they make a few $1 trillion worth of bad bets, while regular people are forced to carry their weight on our backs. Our sons come home from war unable to find good work, unlike in all the promises. And this is another major reason for the current crisis of confidence by the American people in our supposed betters who rule us. So no, the nation as a whole doesn't benefit financially or otherwise from acts of violence and coercion by the American government. Read NSC 68. Paul Nitze did not understand economics. The whole imperial project is a fool's errand. And how much time do I have? 3, 2, 4, okay. And then I wanted to mention Somalia here because I had to skip it for time in my opening statement, but it ain't fair that Somalia always gets skipped. Another 6 weeks or so, it'll be America's longest war. Bush started supporting the warlords to hunt down supposed al-Qaeda terrorists in Somalia before the end of 2001, including the son of Mohammed Aidid, the bad guy from the Black Hawk Down catastrophe of 1993. Those warlords made life miserable for everyone until the people came together to form a new government, the Islamic Courts Union, to force them out. Bush then supported the Ethiopian invasion of 2006, which traded the harmless Islamic Courts Union for the much more dangerous al-Shabaab insurgency. In 2008, Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice decided that ICU chief Sheikh Ahmed Sharif could be the leader of the country after all, just within the form of the new government the U.S. had created for them. Never mind the last 2 years of killing. But al-Shabaab kept fighting, and the U.S. drone war against them has continued ever since. And as soon as the U.S. ceases support, the government it has created in Mogadishu will surely fall, just like Kabul. And Kosovo in 1999. The war was in favor of secession, which is a regime change of sorts. This war put bin Laden's friends in the Kosovo Liberation Army in power, including Hashim Thaci, the convicted organ thief and gangster, and guilty of prosecuting and cleansing the Serb minority there in the inverse of the lies they told to justify starting that war. Bill Clinton in the Weekly Standard claimed that 100,000 civilians had been killed, Kosovar Albanian civilians, by the Serbs. When the war was over, the FBI found a few thousand graves of fighting-aged males and went home after 2 weeks when the alleged mass graves containing the 100,000 killed were proven to be non-existent. Kosovo is now permanently dependent on the United States, where we still maintain a massive military base there to this day. So there have been no successes in the war on terrorism, unless you count winning 2 Iraq wars for the Shiites who despise us and continue to insist that our troops leave their country immediately. I don't.
Please open the voting for the final vote, but also vote only now if your last name begins with an A through M. So just to segment it, pause a moment. If you're not A through M, pause on the voting. But A through M, please vote. And on the resolution, yes, no, or undecided. A willingness to intervene and to seek regime change is key to an American foreign policy that benefits America. Thanks to you both. Thanks to Scott. Thanks to Bill Krystal for a spirited exchange. Bill has professional obligations in the morning and has to take a plane. Scott isn't leaving until Wednesday, and so he's going to be in the corner at the entranceway, and he's going to some local watering hole that a local guy will lead us to. Bill, unfortunately, I know you'd probably love to come because this is your own stamping ground, but I know you've got promises to keep, and so you're going to be taking off. But Scott is going to be doing book signing for his book, Enough Already, at that place. So if you want to congregate in the corner there, at the entranceway, then you can follow Scott wherever he leads you to, where he will be doing book signing and sales. So that's A through M has voted. So now N through the rest of the alphabet can vote. N through Z, please vote on the resolution. And we're going to be compiling a final tally. Meanwhile, I want to announce that both of you are invited to our, to our November 15th event, which will be downtown, actually legitimately in a Soho venue. You'll look it up. That's going to be a debate on intellectual property. Stephan Kinsella versus Richard Epstein. Stephan Kinsella will defend the resolution.
Ooh, actually I want to check that out because
copyright law should be
Stephan Kinsella wrote the book, I think it's Against Intellectual Property, which is one of the books that initially helped convince me to disagree with IP laws, among other books and articles and shit. So yeah, it'd be interesting to watch him actually debate the topics, and see he literally wrote the book that helped lay out the convincing argument for me.
Interesting. Yeah, we can put that in the lineup for sure.
So yeah, like I said, Gene Epstein, I want to say, right? Gene Epstein, the Soho Forum. He hosts a lot of really good debates with interesting debaters and topics and things. And so yeah, that was. So what did you think?
I mean, he got fucking destroyed.
Yeah, it was
Absolutely fucking destroyed, and he just couldn't respond to anything. Like the gulf of difference between the two of them, where Scott had very specific examples of things, and this other guy the best he could do was disagree. Well, that's not my opinion. I don't agree that we caused this. I don't agree that that was the best he could fucking do. Like, his best argument just really boiled down to a matter of taste.
Yeah, and he obviously got triggered by the mention of the Holocaust there, where it's like what Scott was saying during that time is that like we've committed a Holocaust's worth of killing. He's talking about just in terms of raw numbers, like 10 million people right. have been killed due to U.S. intervention in various countries over the course of the past 50 years or so. And that's not, I don't think that's an extreme thing to say, because, he tallied them up. He's like 500,000 here, 250 here, 1 or 2 million there. Like these
it's
add up.
It's objectively true.
Yeah.
But you compare things to, you compare things to that, and you get accused of being anti-Semitic if you even compare anything to it, because it's mitigating the horror of the Holocaust. It's like, no, if anything, it's saying that if you're fucking horrified by this, then you should absolutely be more horrified by this other thing that nobody's fucking talking about.
Yeah, it's
like, if this is the baseline of one of the worst atrocities in the world, like, what about all this shit that you don't even know about? I mean, you're not mitigating anything. You're saying this is terrible. This is also terrible. There's no mitigation going on. It's fucking ridiculous.
Yeah, and this is all having like a lot of this was like the coups and stuff that were talked about. They really focused on like the military side of a lot of things, but they didn't really mention the intelligence side of things, which is something that Wage on Volunteerism mentioned briefly during Bill Krystal's opening statements. He's like, I think he said if he mentions the CIA at all during his opening statements, his 17.5 minutes, then I'll be fucking shocked. Because the thing is, like, a lot of this stuff was carried out by the CIA, by World Bank, by like the economic economic hitman, and then the jackals as well. Like, all these people carried out such covert control and manipulation of foreign countries especially like South America, Central America. Oh my gosh, like Guatemala, Panama, Colombia, like the United Fruit Company, the history of like the World Bank loans to those countries, and the amount of control that they squeezed out of them due to those loans and shit. It's a crazy fucking history. Yeah, that book, The New Confessions of an Economic Hitman, it talks about it a ton, and it's a whole other side of this that isn't even touched on from the military angle. It's as crazy of a fucking story. But yeah, so that was the Scott Horton, Bill Krystal debate. Like I said, it was a good one, but it was so fucking one-sided, and you could just see how defeated Bill Krystal is at the end of it, because he doesn't really have much of a response other than he's like, well, we just see things differently. Like, we have fundamentally different views of how, you know, good the U.S. has been in the world, and that's just a shitty way to end a debate, because like it's either you can fucking like defend your position or you can't, and Scott definitely could. Yeah, he wiped the floor with him.
Oh yeah, he absolutely fucking destroyed him.
And yeah, so that closes out our show for the week, I think. And my fucking forearms are still killing me from the gym earlier. But yeah, we'll continue to look for things that happen, right? You know, some news, and whether it's funny things or it's war or something. And we'll come back on Monday. Or I don't know, are you doing anything for Memorial Day? Is Memorial Day? That's what's coming up, I think.
I may have to. I gotta check my work schedule. So they're flipping everything. Usually we are closed on Monday, open on Tuesday, but because the holiday's coming up, they're actually gonna open on Monday, and then we're gonna be closed on Tuesday.
Okay. Yeah. So we'll figure it out. I know next week, or this week actually, sorry, we're on Monday. I have Thursday off, and I'm not sure what I'm going to be doing next week. I haven't looked at the schedule, but it's either going to go back to Sunday or it's going to go to Thursday. So yeah, if we can't do Monday for some reason, then it's possible that I have Sunday off, so that might be doable as well. But yeah, we'll keep a finger on the pulse of whatever the fuck's going on, and yeah, find something to talk about that's interesting, and be back either Sunday, Monday. And yeah, goodbye, viewers, people. It was nice having you around to watch this with us, and yeah,